She was supposed to die that night. The pack had decided. Her mate had vanished, stolen by forbidden magic, and in the frozen kingdoms of the north, a wolfless queen was worth less than ash. But Seraphine Vale didn't beg. She didn't plead. Instead, she walked into the throne room of the most dangerous alpha alive and demanded something no exile had ever dared to ask for: justice wrapped in vengeance, sealed with a crown. What happened next didn't just change her fate. It shattered an empire. Stay until the end to see how a broken woman becomes the queen who burns betrayal to the ground. Hit that like button and drop your city in the comments so I know my pack is watching. Snow didn't fall gently over Valor. It came down like judgment, thick and suffocating, covering the obsidian towers of the northern kingdom in white that would turn to ice by morning. The kind of cold that made bones ache. The kind that reminded wolves they could still die. Seraphine Vale stood at the edge of the gathering circle, watching her world end in silence. Her breath misted in front of her face. Her fingers had gone numb an hour ago. She didn't move to warm them. There wasn't any point. Warmth was for people who had futures. Warmth was for wolves who belonged. She belonged nowhere now. The circle of pack leaders stood 20 feet away, their backs to her, their voices low and deliberate. They spoke in the measured tones of men deciding whether to put down a sick animal. Clinical. Efficient. She caught fragments of their conversation through the wind. Disgrace. Broken bond. Wolfless. Exile. The last word hit different. Exile meant more than leaving. In the northern territories, exile meant erasure. No pack would take her. No shelter would open. She would wander until cold or hunger or something with teeth found her alone, and she would die unnamed. Elder Corvan turned first. His face was all hard angles and white beard, eyes that had watched 3 generations of wolves rise and fall. He looked at Seraphine the way farmers looked at blighted crops. "Your mate is gone," he said. Seraphine said nothing. "The bond is broken, corrupted by blood magic. You stand before us without a wolf, without a place, without worth." Still, she said nothing. Words wouldn't change what they'd already decided. Corvan's voice dropped lower, colder. In the old laws, a she-wolf who loses her mate to forbidden magic is considered tainted. The pack cannot risk corruption. You will leave Valor tonight. You will not return. If you are seen within our borders after dawn, you will be hunted. One of the younger pack leaders, a man named Garrett, with a scar splitting his lip, spat into the snow. Shouldn't even give her until dawn. She brought this on herself. How? The word came out of Seraphine before she could stop it. Her voice sounded strange, distant, like it belonged to someone else. Garrett stepped forward. His hand rested on the blade at his hip, casual but deliberate. "You think we're stupid? You think we don't know? Your mate didn't just vanish, sweetheart. He was taken, stolen by Lady Vespera Thorn's magic. And magic like that doesn't work unless there's a crack to slip through, which means your bond was already weak, which means you failed him." Seraphine felt something crack inside her chest, not her heart. That had broken weeks ago when Ronan disappeared. This was something deeper, the part of her that still believed the world could be fair. "I loved him," she said quietly. Garrett laughed. It was an ugly sound. Love doesn't mean shit when magic gets involved. You weren't strong enough to hold him. Now we all pay the price. Vespera's insult to the Northern Pack starts and ends with you. Corvin raised a hand. "Enough. The decision is made. Seraphine Vale, you're cast out. Leave now." The other pack leaders turned away, one by one, until she was alone in the circle with only the wind and the falling snow. She didn't cry. Crying was for people who thought tears could change things. Instead, she walked. Itikate. She headed north because south meant going back through packlands, and north meant wilderness. The kind of wilderness where even the predators thought twice. The kind where only the desperate went. The kind where legends lived. Her feet crunched through snow that came up past her knees. Her cloak, thin and threadbare, did almost nothing against the cold. She'd left with the clothes on her back, a water skin, and a knife that probably wouldn't do much good against anything that really wanted her dead. The forest closed in around her like a fist. Trees here grew twisted and black, their branches clawing at the sky. No birds sang, No small animals rustled through the undergrowth, just silence and cold and the slow creeping certainty that she wouldn't survive the week. She walked for hours, then days. Time stopped meaning much when every moment looked the same. White snow, black trees, gray sky. Her stomach cramped with hunger. Her lips split and bled. Frostbite blackened two of her toes. She kept walking. On the fourth day, she started talking to herself. "You're going to die out here," she said aloud. Her voice sounded hoarse. Raw. "You know that, right? You're going to freeze or starve and no one will ever find your body." She kept walking. On the fifth day, she saw the wolves. They moved through the trees like smoke, gray and silent, eyes reflecting moonlight. 6 of them, maybe 7. She'd lost count. They circled her slowly, testing, watching for weakness. She stopped walking and pulled out her knife. The lead wolf, a massive male with a scarred muzzle, growled low. It wasn't a warning. It was a promise. Seraphine didn't run. Running would only make it faster. She stared at the wolf and felt something cold settle in her chest. Not fear, acceptance. If she was going to die, she'd do it on her feet. The wolf lunged. She sidestepped, slashed wild, felt the blade connect with something solid. The wolf yelped and retreated. The others tensed, ready to swarm. Then a voice cut through the clearing like a blade. "Enough!" The wolves froze. Seraphine turned and saw him. A man stood at the edge of the trees, tall and broad-shouldered, wrapped in dark furs that made him look like part of the forest itself. His face was hard, all sharp lines and cold eyes. He didn't look like someone who smiled often. He looked like someone who'd forgotten how. The wolves lowered their heads and slunk back into the shadows. The man stepped forward. His boots made no sound in the snow. He studied Seraphine the way a butcher studied meat, clinical and detached. "You're a long way from Packlands," he said. Seraphine kept her knife up. "Who are you?" The man's mouth twitched, not quite a smile. Someone who's wondering why a lone she-wolf is wandering the Blackwood with nothing but a dull knife and a death wish. "I'm not Pack anymore." "Obviously." The man tilted his head. "You've got frostbite, you're starving, and you smell like 3 days of bad decisions. So either you're running from something or running towards something. Which is it?" Seraphine's grip tightened on the knife. "Why do you care?" "I don't. But these are my woods. I don't like finding corpses in them. Scares off the game. So you can either come with me and get warm, or you can stay here and freeze. Your choice." He turned and started walking. Seraphine hesitated. Every instinct screamed not to trust him, but every instinct had also told her that Ronan would never leave, that Pack loyalty meant something, that the world was fair. Her instincts were shit. She followed. The man's cabin sat in a clearing so well hidden that Seraphine almost walked past it twice. It was small, built from blackwood logs and river stone, with smoke rising from a chimney that suggested warmth and food and things she'd almost forgotten existed. Inside, it was sparse. One room, a fireplace, a table, a bed in the corner. Weapons hung on the walls, swords, axes, knives of every size and shape. The place smelled like wood smoke and leather and something sharper. Blood, maybe. The man gestured toward the fire. "Sit. Warm up. I'll get food." Seraphine sat on the floor near the flames and felt heat seep into her skin for the first time in days. It hurt. Warmth always hurt after cold. The man returned with bread, dried meat, and a water skin. He set it down in front of her without a word. She ate like a wolf herself, tearing into the food with shaking hands. She didn't realize how hungry she was until the food was gone and she was licking grease from her fingers. The man watched from across the room. When she finished, he spoke. "Name's Rael. I'm a tracker. I work for people who pay well and don't ask questions." Seraphine wiped her mouth. "I don't have money. Didn't ask for any." Rael leaned against the wall, arms crossed. "I asked why you're here." She met his eyes. They were pale gray, like winter ice. "I'm looking for someone." "Who?" "The Alpha King." Rael's expression didn't change. For a long moment, he said nothing. Then he laughed. It was a short, sharp sound, like breaking glass. "You're insane." "Probably." "You know what they say about him?" Rael pushed off the wall and walked closer. Malric Duskbane doesn't take visitors. He doesn't grant audiences. He sits in that black fortress of his and rules through fear and blood, and the only people who see him are the ones he wants dead. You walk into Nightspire Citadel asking for a favor. You don't walk out. I'm not asking for a favor. Seraphine's voice was steady. I'm offering a trade. What could you possibly trade that the Alpha King would want? The truth. Seraphine stood, her legs still shaky but holding. Someone used forbidden magic to break a mate bond. Someone humiliated the northern packs. Someone made the king look weak by letting sorcery go unpunished on his borders. I know who, I know why, and I'll give him every detail if he gives me what I want. Which is? Justice. Rael studied her for a long moment, then he shook his head. You really are insane. Will you take me to him? Why would I do that? Because I'll die if you don't. Seraphine's voice dropped. And you said you don't like corpses in your woods. Rael was quiet. The fire crackled between them. Finally he sighed. You're going to regret this. Probably. Rael grabbed his cloak from a hook by the door. We leave at dawn. Nightspire is 3 days north, and if you slow me down, I'm leaving you behind. Understood? And one more thing. Rael turned, his expression deadly serious. The Alpha King isn't like other rulers. He doesn't bluff. He doesn't negotiate. If you walk into his throne room asking for something, he will take everything you have and decide if it's enough. You understand me? Everything. Seraphine nodded. She understood perfectly. She had nothing left to lose. Choke. They traveled in silence. Rael moved through the wilderness like he was part of it, his steps sure and quiet, his eyes constantly scanning. Seraphine followed, struggling to keep pace. Her body was still weak, her feet still numb, but she pushed through the pain because stopping meant being left behind. On the second day, Rael finally spoke. You ever been to Nightspire? No. Most people who go don't come back. You know why? Seraphine shook her head. Because Malric doesn't suffer fools. Rael ducked under a low-hanging branch. He doesn't care about your story, doesn't care about your pain. He cares about power, about control. You walk in there with some sob story about a broken heart, he'll eat you alive. It's not a sob story. No? Rael glanced back at her. Then what is it? Revenge. Rael smiled. That's better. They crested a ridge just as the sun was setting on the third day, and Seraphine saw it. Nightspire Citadel. It rose from the valley below like a black blade stabbed into the earth, all sharp towers and iron battlements, walls taller than trees, banners snapping in the wind, each one marked with a silver wolf's head. Torches burned along the ramparts, flickering like distant stars. It looked like the kind of place where hope went to die. Rael stopped beside her, last chance to turn back. Seraphine didn't answer. She started down the hill. The gates of Nightspire were guarded by soldiers in black armor, each one carrying a spear taller than a man. They watched Seraphine and Rael approach with the dead-eyed focus of people who'd killed before and would kill again without hesitation. One of them stepped forward. State your business. Rael nodded toward Seraphine. She has information for the king. The guard's eyes flicked to her. What kind of information? The kind he'll want to hear, Seraphine said. The guard studied her for a long moment. Then he turned and spoke to another soldier who disappeared through a side door. They waited. Minutes passed. Then the door opened again and a woman stepped out. She was tall and severe, dressed in black leather that looked more like armor than clothing. Her hair was pulled back tight, her face all sharp angles and colder eyes. She looked at Seraphine the way someone might look at an insect. The king will see you, the woman said. Her voice was clipped. Efficient. Follow me. And if you waste his time, you won't leave this citadel alive. Understood, Seraphine said. The woman turned and walked through the gates. Seraphine followed. Behind her, Rael called out, Good luck, you're going to need it. The gates closed with a sound like a tomb sealing shut. Kick. Inside, Nightspire was even more intimidating. The corridors were wide and tall, lit by torches that cast long shadows across stone walls. Everything was black. Black stone, black iron, black tapestries showing battles and wolves, and scenes of conquest that made Seraphine's stomach turn. They passed soldiers standing at attention, servants hurrying past with lowered eyes, and courtiers in fine clothes who stopped talking when Seraphine walked by. She felt their stares, judging, measuring, dismissing. The woman led her through a massive set of double doors and into the throne room. Seraphine stopped breathing. The room was enormous. Marble pillars rose toward a ceiling so high it disappeared into shadow. Silver braziers burned with pale fire that gave off no heat. Wolf statues lined the aisle, each one carved from obsidian and standing twice the height of a man. And at the far end, on a throne of black iron and bone, sat the Alpha King. Malric Duskbane. He was bigger than she'd expected, broad-shouldered and still, dressed in armor that looked like it had been forged from midnight itself. His crown was simple, silver metal twisted into sharp points, but it sat on his head like it belonged there, like it had always been there. His face was hard, all brutal lines and cold authority. No warmth, no mercy. His eyes were the worst part. They were pale blue, almost colorless, and when they fixed on Seraphine, she felt like he was looking through her skin straight into her bones. He didn't speak. The woman who'd led Seraphine in bowed. "My king, this woman claims to have information about forbidden magic used against the northern pacts." Malric's gaze didn't leave Seraphine. "Name, Seraphine Vale. Pack, I have none. I was exiled." "For?" "A broken mate bond. Magic was used, blood magic." Malric leaned forward slightly. The movement was small, but it made the entire room feel smaller. "Who cast it?" "Lady Vespera Thorn." The name hung in the air like smoke. For the first time, something flickered across Malric's face. Not surprise. Recognition. He sat back. Vespera is a noble, powerful family, considerable influence in the southern courts. He tilted his head. Why would she waste forbidden magic on a bond between nobodies? "Because my mate wasn't a nobody." Seraphine's voice was steady. Ronan Ashmore was being groomed for pack leadership. He was strong, connected, ambitious. And Vespera wanted him for herself, so she broke our bond and took him. Malric's expression didn't change. "And where is Ronan now?" "I don't know. That's why I'm here." Seraphine stepped closer. The guards along the walls tensed. She ignored them. Vespera used magic that should have gotten her executed. She humiliated the northern pacts. She made you look weak by operating on your borders without consequence. I can give you everything you need to bring her down. Every detail, every witness, every piece of evidence. Malric studied her in silence. Then he spoke, his voice low and cold as winter ground. "And what do you want in return?" "I want her destroyed. I want her title stripped. I want her power broken. I want everyone to know what she did." Seraphine's hands clenched into fists. "And I want my mate bond restored so I can reclaim what she stole." Malric stood. The movement was deliberate, almost lazy, but it changed the entire room. Suddenly he wasn't just a man on a throne. He was a force, a storm in the shape of a king. He walked down the steps slowly, his boots echoing on marble. He stopped 5 feet from Seraphine. Up close, he was even more intimidating, taller, harder. His presence pressed against her like a physical weight. "Do you know what it costs to break a false bond?" he asked quietly. "No. Ancient law requires a sovereign vow, a bond stronger than the one that was broken." Malric's pale eyes held hers. "If you want justice, if you want Vespera destroyed, if you want your life back, you will stand beside me beneath the crimson moon and become my queen." The words hit like a fist to the chest. Seraphine stared at him. "What?" "You heard me." Malric didn't blink. "That's the price. You want vengeance, you want power. You marry me. You take the crown. You stand beside me and help me tear Vespera's world apart." "Why?" The word came out hoarse. "Why would you do this?" "Because Vespera is a problem I've been trying to solve for years. She's too connected to touch through normal channels. But a queen with a personal vendetta and proof of blood magic? That changes everything." Malric's voice dropped lower. "And because I need someone beside me who understands that crowns are earned through necessity, not nobility." The throne room was silent. Seraphine's mind raced. This was insane. Marrying the Alpha King? Becoming queen? She'd come here asking for justice, not... But what was the alternative? Go back to the wilderness and die? Wander alone and forgotten? Let Vespera win? She looked up at Malric. His expression was unreadable. He wasn't begging, wasn't pleading. He was offering a trade, cold, practical, brutal, just like everything else in this world. Seraphine took a breath. Then she spoke the words that would change everything. I accept. Malric's mouth curved. Not quite a smile. Close enough. Then we have an accord. He turned and walked back toward the throne. The ceremony will take place in 7 days. Until then, you are under my protection. Betray me, and you'll wish the pack had killed you when they had the chance. He sat down. Understood, Seraphine said quietly. Good. Malric waved a hand. Dismissed. The woman in black leather appeared at Seraphine's side and led her out of the throne room. The doors closed behind them. And for the first time since Ronan vanished, Seraphine felt something other than grief. She felt dangerous. So, the room they gave her was larger than any place she'd ever lived. High ceilings. A bed big enough for 3 people. Windows overlooking the valley. Silk curtains. A fireplace already burning. A wash basin with actual hot water. Seraphine stood in the center of it all and felt like she'd stepped into someone else's life. A servant appeared, a young woman with kind eyes and nervous hands. She bowed. My lady, I'm here to help you prepare for... I don't need help. The servant hesitated. The king insists. You'll need proper clothing, training in court etiquette. Lessons on... Seraphine turned. What's your name? Mira, my lady. Stop calling me that. Seraphine sat on the edge of the bed. I'm not a lady. I'm just someone who made a deal. Mira's expression softened. If I may, my lady, everyone here made a deal. That's how Nightspire works. The question isn't whether you deal. It's whether you survive what comes after. Seraphine looked at her. What comes after? Mira glanced toward the door, then back. The court. They'll tear you apart if you let them. Why? Because you're nobody, an exile, a broken wolf, and you're about to become queen. Mira's voice dropped to a whisper. They'll see you as weak, as an insult, and they'll do everything they can to make you fail. Let them try, Seraphine said quietly. Mira studied her for a moment. Then she smiled. You might survive after all. The next 7 days passed in a blur of preparation that felt more like warfare than wedding planning. Seamstresses measured her for gowns she'd never wear again. Tutors drilled her on lineages and alliances she didn't care about. Guards taught her to walk like she owned every room she entered. And through it all, she caught glimpses of Malric. He was always distant, always watching. He never spoke to her directly, but she felt his presence like gravity. On the 6th day, she saw him training in the courtyard. He moved like violence given form, all controlled power and brutal efficiency. He sparred against 3 soldiers at once and made it look easy. Sweat gleamed on his skin. His jaw was tight with focus. When he finished, he looked up and caught her watching. Their eyes met across the courtyard. Neither looked away. Then Malric turned and walked inside without a word. Seraphine realized something in that moment. She thought Malric was a tyrant. Maybe he was. But he was also alone. And loneliness, she knew, was the most dangerous wound of all. Showtime. The night before the ceremony, Seraphine couldn't sleep. She stood at the window looking out over the valley. Snow fell in the moonlight. Somewhere out there, Vespera was living her life, untouched and unpunished. Not for long. A knock at the door pulled her from her thoughts. Come in. The door opened, and Malric stepped inside. He looked different without the armor. Still dangerous, but less like a weapon and more like a man carrying the weight of too many wars. He didn't speak at first, just stood there, studying her. Finally, Seraphine broke the silence. Second thoughts? Always. Malric walked to the window and stood beside her. A king who doesn't question his choices is a king who won't live long. Then why go through with it? Because the alternative is worse. He looked at her. You'll be my queen tomorrow. The court will hate you. Half of them will try to poison you. The other half will try to seduce you into betrayal. And Vespera will come for you the moment she hears. I know. Do you? Malric's voice was quiet. Because once this is done, there's no going back. You'll be bound to me, to this throne, to every enemy I've made. and I've made a lot of enemies. Good. Seraphine met his eyes. Then we'll make more together. For the first time, Malric smiled. It wasn't warm, but it was real. You're going to be an interesting queen, he said. Then he left, and Seraphine stood alone in the dark, wondering what she'd just set in motion. The Crimson Moon ceremony began at midnight. The throne room had been transformed. Silver banners hung from every pillar, torches burned with pale fire. Masked nobles filled the space, hundreds of them, watching with eyes that gleamed like predators. Seraphine walked down the aisle in a gown that felt like armor. Black silk, silver embroidery, heavy enough to remind her with every step that this was real. At the end of the aisle stood Malric. He wore black and silver, his crown catching the firelight. His expression was unreadable. When she reached him, he took her hand. His grip was firm, cold, real. The officiant spoke words Seraphine barely heard, something about bonds and sovereignty and power that transcended blood. Then Malric spoke. I take Seraphine Vale as my queen, my equal, my ally, bound not by destiny, but by choice. The words echoed through the chamber. Seraphine's turn. She looked at Malric and saw the truth behind his cold eyes. He wasn't just offering her vengeance, he was offering her survival. I take Malric Duskbane as my king, she said, my equal, my ally, bound not by destiny, but by choice. The officiant raised his hands. By ancient law and sovereign vow, I pronounce you bound. Malric kissed her. It was brief, formal, but in that moment Seraphine felt something shift inside her. Not love, not yet, but the beginning of something that might become it. The nobles applauded. Seraphine turned to face them. And at the back of the crowd, half hidden in shadow, she saw a woman in a crimson gown. Lady Vespera Thorn. Their eyes met. Vespera smiled. It was the smile of someone who knew exactly what game they were playing, and who planned to win. Seraphine smiled back. Let the war begin. The reception hall blazed with silver light and barely concealed hostility. Seraphine stood beside Malric on the dais, her hand resting lightly on his arm, feeling the eyes of every noble in the room drilling into her like daggers. The weight of the crown on her head felt less like an honor and more like a target painted in precious metal. The crowd below moved in carefully orchestrated chaos. Courtiers in jeweled masks whispered behind gloved hands. Pack leaders clustered in tight groups, their body language radiating suspicion. And servants wove through them, all carrying trays of wine that looked more like blood in the crimson light. Malric stood perfectly still beside her. His face revealed nothing. But Seraphine had learned something in the past 7 days of watching him from a distance. The Alpha King's stillness wasn't calm. It was the stillness of a predator deciding which throat to tear out first. A man approached the dais. Tall, silver-haired, dressed in expensive black with gold threading. His smile didn't reach his eyes. Your Majesty, my Queen. Lord Davern Cortez, head of the Southern Council. He bowed just deep enough to be respectful and just shallow enough to be insulting. What a remarkable evening, such an unexpected union. Seraphine felt Malric's arm tense beneath her fingers. She spoke before he could. Unexpected how, Lord Cortez? Davern's smile widened. He had the kind of face that looked trustworthy until you noticed the coldness behind it. Well, Your Majesty, we had all assumed the king would choose a bride from one of the established houses, someone with lineage, connections, experience in matters of court. His gaze swept over her like she was livestock. But I'm sure you'll learn quickly. I'm sure I will, Seraphine said quietly. After all, I've already learned that men who smile while delivering insults usually lack the courage to say what they really mean. The temperature in the immediate area dropped 10 degrees. Davron's smile froze. Around them, conversation stuttered to a halt as courtiers turned to watch. Malric's voice cut through the silence like a blade. Is there something you'd like to say to my queen, Davron? No, Your Majesty. Davron's bow was stiffer this time. Only congratulations, then offer them and move on. Davron retreated into the crowd. Seraphine felt Malric lean closer. His breath was warm against her ear. First blood goes to you. Is that what this is? Blood? Everything here is blood. It's just a question of whose gets spilled first. Before she could respond, another figure approached. This one made Seraphine's stomach clench. Lady Vespera Thorn moved through the crowd like she owned it. Her crimson gown flowed around her like liquid fire. Her dark hair was pulled back in an elaborate style that probably required 3 servants and an hour to arrange. She was beautiful in the way poisonous things were beautiful. Bright, captivating, deadly. She stopped at the base of the dais and sank into a curtsy so perfect it looked choreographed. "Your Majesty. Your Majesty." Her voice was honey over glass. What a magnificent ceremony. I was absolutely moved. Seraphine forced herself to breathe normally. Every instinct screamed to launch herself down those steps and tear the smile off Vespera's face. But that wasn't how this game worked. Not here, not now. "Lady Vespera," Malric said. His tone was neutral, cold. "I'm surprised you chose to attend. How could I miss such a historic occasion?" Vespera rose gracefully. "The king taking a bride. And such an interesting choice." Her eyes fixed on Seraphine. "I don't believe we've been properly introduced. Lady Vespera Thorn of the Southern Houses." Seraphine met her gaze and held it. "We've met, have we?" Vespera tilted her head like a curious bird. "I'm afraid I don't recall. Perhaps you were distracted." Seraphine's voice was quiet. "Steady. You seemed quite busy at the time, with forbidden magic, and stealing things that didn't belong to you." The smile never left Vespera's face, but something flickered in her eyes. Calculation. Recognition. And underneath it all, something darker. "I think you're mistaken, Your Majesty. I would never involve myself with anything so crude as forbidden magic. That's the domain of desperate people. And I've never been desperate. There's a first time for everything," Seraphine said. The two women stared at each other across the space of 5 stares and 1,000 unspoken threats. Malric's voice broke the moment. "Enjoy the celebration, Lady Vespera, but be mindful of where you walk. My queen values honesty, and I value my queen." Vespera's curtsy was shallower this time. "Of course, Your Majesty." She turned and disappeared into the crowd like smoke. Seraphine realized her hands were shaking. She clenched them into fists to hide it. "That wasn't smart," Malric said quietly. "Showing your hand so soon. She killed my life. I'm done pretending. Pretending is how you survive here." He turned to face her. His pale eyes were unreadable. "Vespera is dangerous because she knows how to wait, how to smile while planning your destruction. You want revenge? Learn patience first. How long did you wait to take your throne?" Malric was silent for a moment. "Too long. That's how I know the cost." The rest of the reception passed in a blur of faces and forced smiles. Nobles approached one after another, offering congratulations that sounded like threats and welcome that felt like judgment. Seraphine played her part, smiled when expected, nodded at appropriate moments, and all the while she felt Malric's presence beside her like an anchor in a storm. When it finally ended, when the last noble had bowed and the last servant had cleared the last glass, Malric led her through empty corridors toward the royal wing. They walked in silence. Seraphine's feet hurt. Her face hurt from smiling. Her entire body felt like it had been through a battle that left no visible wounds. Malric stopped outside a set of double doors. "Your chambers. Mine are through there." He gestured to another door 10 feet away. "If you need anything, the guards will find me." "That's it? What else were you expecting?" "I don't know." Seraphine felt exhaustion pressing down on her like physical weight. "Guidance? Advice? Something other than being thrown into a room full of people who hate me?" "Welcome to being queen." Malric's expression softened slightly. "Not much. But enough. You survived tonight. That's more than most do their first time facing the court." "Is it always like that?" "Worse, usually. Tonight they were on good behavior because I was watching." Malric turned toward his own chambers. "Get some rest. Tomorrow the real work begins." "What real work?" "Destroying Vespera." He glanced back. "That is why you're here, isn't it?" He left before she could answer. Seraphine stood alone in the corridor, crown heavy on her head, and wondered what the hell she'd gotten herself into. The next morning arrived too soon and too cold. Mira woke her before dawn with tea and bread and news that made Seraphine's stomach turn. The court is gathering for morning council, Mira said, as she laid out a deep green gown that looked like it weighed as much as armor. You're expected to attend. Expected by who? The king. And tradition. Mira helped Seraphine into the dress, her fingers quick and efficient. Queens sit beside kings during council. You don't have to speak. Most don't. But you have to be there. What do they discuss? Everything. Territory disputes, trade agreements, pack alliances, punishment for lawbreakers. Mira paused. Sometimes executions. Seraphine's hand stilled. Executions? Nightspire justice is swift. If someone breaks pack law, the council hears evidence and the king delivers judgment. Usually the same day. Mira's voice dropped. It's meant to remind everyone what happens when you step out of line. Has anyone ever challenged him? Once. Mira finished with the dress and stepped back. The man's head hung on the eastern gate for a month. No one's challenged him since. The council chamber was smaller than the throne room, but no less intimidating. A long obsidian table dominated the center, surrounded by high-backed chairs filled with men who looked like they'd never smiled in their lives. Pack leaders, military commanders, lords from every major house. And at the head of the table sat Malric. He looked up when Seraphine entered. His expression revealed nothing. My queen. The chair beside me. Every eye in the room turned to watch as Seraphine crossed to the empty seat. She could feel their judgment, their assessment, their dismissal. She sat. The council meeting began. For the first hour, Seraphine listened to discussions about grain shipments and border patrols and disputes between packs over hunting territory. It was tedious, exhausting, the kind of minutia that ground kingdoms into dust one decision at a time. Malric spoke rarely. When he did, his words carried absolute authority. No one argued. No one questioned. They simply obeyed. Then Lord Davron spoke. Your Majesty, there's the matter of the eastern forests. Reports continue of rogue activity. Wolves attacking supply routes. Burning outposts. How many incidents? Malric's voice was flat. 7 in the past month. Davron shuffled papers. 3 dead, 24 injured. The attacks show coordination. Organization. This isn't random violence. Who leads them? We don't know. The survivors describe a large male, scarred, savage. He doesn't give commands so much as inspire loyalty through brutality. Seraphine's blood went cold. Scarred, large, brutal, Ronin. She must have made a sound because Malric's gaze cut toward her, sharp, assessing. Do we have a description? Malric asked, his eyes still on Seraphine. Partial. One survivor said the leader carries a scar across his throat, like someone tried to cut it and failed. The room tilted. Seraphine's hands gripped the armrests of her chair until her knuckles went white. Ronin had a scar like that. She'd traced it with her fingers in the dark, asked how he got it, and he'd laughed and said it was from a fight when he was young and stupid. It couldn't be him. He was gone. Taken. Stolen by Vespera's magic. Wasn't he? Malric stood. We ride east at dawn. I'll lead the hunt myself. Your Majesty, Davron said quickly. Is that wise? Sending the king into rogue territory? I'm not asking permission, Davron. Malric's voice could have cut steel. I'm informing you. Prepare 20 of your best trackers. We leave at first light. And the queen? Another voice asked. Lord Garrett, the same man who'd spat at Seraphine's feet during her exile. Does she accompany you? The entire room turned to look at her. Malric's gaze held hers. His expression was unreadable. She comes, he said finally. If these rogues are connected to the magic that brought her here, she has a right to face them. Your Majesty, that's... I said she comes. The words were quiet, final, dismissed. The council members filed out. Seraphine sat frozen in her chair. Malric waited until they were alone. Then he walked around the table and stood in front of her. Who is he? What? The scarred male leading the rogues. You know him. It wasn't a question. Seraphine's throat was dry. I don't know. Maybe. The description sounds like your former mate. Malric's eyes were cold. The one you told me was stolen by Vespera's magic. He was. Was he? Or did he run? Because there's a difference. One makes you a victim. The other makes you a fool. The words hit like a slap. Seraphine stood. Her legs shook, but she forced them steady. I came here for justice. If Ronan is alive, if he's leading those attacks, then I deserve answers. You'll get them. Malric stepped closer. His presence filled the space between them. But understand something. If we find him, if he's the one responsible for those deaths, I will execute him, mate or not, history or not. He dies. Can you live with that? Seraphine met his gaze. Could she? A week ago, she would have said no. A week ago, she still believed Ronan was a victim, that their bond had been pure, that love was something sacred. Now she didn't know what she believed. Yes, she said quietly. I can live with it. Good. Malric turned toward the door. Pack light. We ride before dawn. He left. Seraphine stood alone in the council chamber and felt the last pieces of her old life crumbling into ash. The eastern forests were darker than Seraphine remembered wilderness being. The hunting party moved through trees that grew so close together they blocked out the sun, leaving everything in a perpetual twilight that made it impossible to judge time. 20 of Nightspire's best trackers spread out in formation around Malric and Seraphine, their eyes constantly scanning for threats. They'd been riding for 2 days. Seraphine's thighs ached from the saddle. Her back hurt. Her hands were blistered from gripping the reins. But she didn't complain. Complaining meant weakness, and weakness here meant death. Malric rode beside her. He hadn't spoken much since they left Nightspire, just occasional orders to the trackers and warnings about terrain. But Seraphine felt his attention on her constantly, watching, judging, waiting for her to break. She wouldn't give him the satisfaction. On the 3rd day, they found the first body, a scout, young male. His throat had been torn out so viciously that his head barely stayed attached. The ground around him was soaked black with old blood. One of the trackers knelt beside the corpse. 3 days dead, maybe 4. Killed by a wolf, large one. How large? Malric dismounted and crouched beside the tracker, alpha-sized. The tracker pointed to marks in the dirt. Look at the paw prints. This wasn't a normal wolf. This was someone powerful, someone who knew how to kill. Malric studied the prints. Then he looked at Seraphine. Still want to be here? More than ever. They followed the trail deeper into the forest. As they rode, Seraphine noticed things. Small things. Claw marks on trees that looked intentional, arranged. Territorial markings that formed patterns. And bones. Scattered remains of animals, and sometimes things that looked like they might have been human once. This isn't random, she said quietly to Malric. This is deliberate. Someone is sending a message. What message? That they're not afraid of you. Malric's jaw tightened. They should be. They made camp that night in a clearing barely large enough for the group. The trackers built a fire and posted guards on rotation. Seraphine sat near the flames, trying to warm her hands, trying not to think about what they might find tomorrow. Malric sat down beside her. His presence was solid, real, grounding in a way she didn't expect. Tell me about him, he said. Who? Ronan, the man you thought you loved. Seraphine was quiet for a long time. The fire crackled between them. Around them, trackers talked in low voices and checked weapons and tried not to stare at their queen sitting beside their king like it was the most natural thing in the world. He was strong, she said finally, confident. Everyone respected him. When he walked into a room, people noticed. And when he chose me, I thought it meant something. I thought it meant I was worth noticing too. And now? Now I think I confused being chosen with being valued. Seraphine stared into the flames. Being chosen is about someone else's decision. Being valued is about how they treat you after. And Ronan never valued me. He valued what I represented, a future, a legacy, a step toward power. Malric was silent. Then he spoke, his voice quiet. That's the difference between people who want power and people who understand it. The ones who want it think it comes from titles and territory and making others smaller. The ones who understand it know it comes from being someone others choose to follow even when they don't have to. Is that why you're king? No. I'm king because I was born into it and too stubborn to let it kill me. But it's why I'm still king. Malric looked at her. His pale eyes reflected firelight. The crown doesn't make you a leader. How you wear it does. How do you wear it? like it weighs 1,000 pounds. Because it does. They sat in silence until the fire burned low and the night pressed in around them. Then Malric stood. Get some sleep. Tomorrow we find your answers. He walked toward his tent. Seraphine watched him go and realized something unsettling. She was starting to understand him, and understanding him made everything more complicated. The attack came at dawn. Seraphine woke to screams and the sound of claws on earth and chaos erupting through the camp like wildfire. She scrambled out of her bedroll, grabbed the knife from her belt, and burst out of the tent into madness. Wolves everywhere. Not just rogues. An entire pack. 20, 30, maybe more. They tore through the camp with coordinated brutality, targeting guards first, then supplies, then anything that moved. The Nightspire trackers fought back hard. Steel rang against claws. Blood sprayed across dirt. Men shouted orders that got swallowed by snarls and screaming. Seraphine saw Malric in the center of it all. He fought like something inhuman, all brutal efficiency and cold precision. His sword moved too fast to follow, cutting through fur and flesh and bone like they were paper. Two wolves lunged at him simultaneously. He killed them both before they landed. A rogue broke from the pack and charged straight at Seraphine. She reacted on instinct, dropped low, slashed upward with her knife, felt the blade sink into something soft. The wolf yelped and stumbled. She drove the knife in again, and again, and again until it stopped moving. Her hands were shaking, covered in blood. She looked down at the dead wolf and felt nothing. No guilt, no horror, just cold satisfaction that she'd survived. Then she heard the voice. Seraphine. She turned, and there he was. Ronan. He stood at the edge of the clearing, half hidden in shadow, but she'd recognize him anywhere. Taller than she remembered, broader, scarred across his throat and down his left cheek. His eyes were wild, feral, but they were his eyes. Her heart stopped. He was alive. The battle continued around them, but Seraphine couldn't look away, couldn't move, couldn't breathe. Ronan stepped forward. His voice was rough, raw, like he'd forgotten how to use it properly. I didn't think I'd see you again. You're alive. The words came out strangled. Vespera's magic didn't work the way she planned. Ronan's mouth twisted into something that might have been a smile once. Turns out breaking a mate bond when both wolves are strong just drives them feral instead of killing them. I've been out here for months. Building, planning, waiting. Waiting for what? Revenge. His eyes fixed on her. On everyone who let this happen. I didn't let anything happen, Seraphine said. Her grip tightened on her knife. You were taken from me. Was I? Ronan moved closer. Or did I see an opportunity and take it? The words hit like ice water. What? Vespera offered me something, Seraphine. Power. Position. A future that didn't involve being trapped in some backwater pack waiting for old wolves to die so I could finally matter. She said all I had to do was let go. Let go of you. Let go of the bond. Let go of the mediocre life we were building. Ronan's voice dropped. And I did. I let go. Seraphine felt the ground shift beneath her. You chose this. Her voice was barely a whisper. You chose to break our bond. I chose ambition over sentiment. Ronan shrugged. Turns out the spell didn't work right. But that's not your problem anymore, is it? I hear you've done well for yourself. Queen of Nightspire. Married to the most powerful alpha alive. Guess you chose ambition, too. That's not the same, isn't it? We both made trades. You just made a better one. A shadow moved behind Ronan. Malric. He came out of nowhere, silent as death, and his blade was already moving. Ronan sensed it a half-second too late. He twisted, dodged, but Malric's sword still caught him across the ribs, opening a line of red. Ronan snarled and shifted mid-movement, bones cracking, fur erupting, until a massive wolf stood where the man had been. Malric didn't hesitate. He shifted too, faster, smoother. His wolf was bigger, darker, all brutal power and controlled rage. They collided in a storm of teeth and claws. Seraphine watched, frozen, as the two wolves tore into each other with savage intensity. Blood sprayed, flesh ripped. The sounds they made weren't animal or human, but something in between. Malric fought like he'd been born to kill, every movement precise, every strike lethal. He wasn't trying to wound Ronan, he was trying to end him, and Ronan fought like a cornered animal with nothing left to lose. Around them, the rogue pack scattered. The Nightspire trackers had beaten them back, killed enough to break their formation, and now they fled into the forest like smoke. But Ronan didn't run. He lunged at Malric's throat. Malric caught him midair, jaws closing around Ronan's shoulder, and slammed him into the ground so hard the earth cracked. Ronan yelped, struggled, tried to break free. Malric's jaws tightened, and Seraphine saw it. The moment, the choice, the decision that would end everything. "Stop!" Her voice cut through the chaos. Both wolves froze. Malric's eyes found hers. They burned with cold fire, a question in them, an offering. He would kill Ronan right now if she asked. All she had to do was nod. Seraphine looked at the wolf that had been her mate, the male she'd loved, the man who'd betrayed her so completely that nothing remained of what they'd been. Part of her wanted him dead. Part of her wanted to watch Malric tear his throat out and know that justice had been served. But another part, the part that had survived exile and humiliation and the slow death of hope, knew something else. Death was too easy. She wanted him to live with what he'd done. "Take him alive," she said. Malric released Ronan slowly. The rogue wolf collapsed, panting, bleeding, defeated. Guards swarmed in, chains and silver restraints ready. They bound Ronan so tightly he couldn't even shift back to human form. Malric transformed, stood naked and blood-covered in the morning light. Someone threw him a cloak. He didn't bother fastening it, just walked straight to Seraphine. "He's guilty of treason, rebellion, murder. The law demands execution." "I know. Then why keep him alive?" "Because I want him to stand trial. I want everyone to hear what he did, what he chose. I want his name destroyed the way he destroyed my life." Seraphine's voice was steady. "Death is mercy. I'm done giving mercy to people who don't deserve it." Malric studied her. Then something shifted in his expression. Not quite approval. "Close enough." "As you wish, my queen." They broke camp and started the journey back to Nightspire. Ronan was dragged behind them in chains, bleeding and broken, and conscious enough to understand exactly where they were taking him. And Seraphine rode beside Malric in silence, feeling something cold and hard settle in her chest where her heart used to be. She'd come here for vengeance. Now she was going to watch it burn everything down. They reached Nightspire 4 days later. The city had heard about the capture. News traveled fast in the Wolf Kingdoms. By the time they rode through the gates, crowds had gathered, silent, watching, waiting to see the rogue who dared challenge their king, and the queen who'd ordered him taken alive. Malric led them straight to the dungeons. The cells beneath Nightspire were old, ancient, built into bedrock and carved with runes that suppressed shifting. Ronan was thrown into the deepest one, chains attached to walls that had held stronger wolves than him. He shifted back to human form the moment they locked the door, collapsed against the stone, blood still seeping from a dozen wounds. Seraphine stood outside his cell and looked at him, really looked at him. This was the man she'd loved, the man she'd built dreams around, the man she'd thought was her future. He looked pathetic now, small, broken, nothing like the legend she'd carried in her memory. "Why did you do it?" she asked quietly. Ronan laughed. It was a bitter, ugly sound. "I told you why. Ambition, power. The same reason you're standing there wearing a crown instead of freezing to death in the Blackwood. We're the same, Seraphine. We just chose different monsters to bargain with. We're nothing alike." "No?" Ronan's eyes fixed on her. "Then tell me, if Malric hadn't offered you that deal, if he'd turned you away, would you still be here? Or would you have died alone and forgotten like you deserved?" The words were designed to wound. They didn't. Because Seraphine realized something in that moment. Ronan was right about one thing. She had made a bargain. But the difference was simple. Malric had been honest about the cost. Ronan had lied about everything. "The trial is tomorrow," she said. "The court will hear your crimes. They'll hear how you betrayed your mate, conspired with Vespera, murdered innocent wolves, and tried to start a rebellion. And then they'll watch you die." Ronan smiled. It didn't reach his eyes. "At least I'll die remembered." "What will you be? The nobody queen who bought her crown with a king's pity?" "I'll be the woman who survived you." Seraphine turned and walked away. Behind her, Ronan's laughter echoed through the dungeon. But it sounded hollow now, empty, like everything else about him. That night, Seraphine couldn't sleep. She stood in her chambers staring out the window at the city below. Night spire glowed in the darkness, torches and braziers and moonlight turning stone into silver. A knock at her door. "Come in." Malric entered. He looked tired, the kind of tired that went bone deep. He carried 2 glasses and a bottle of something dark. "Figured you could use this." He poured, handed her a glass. They drank in silence. "Tomorrow changes everything," Malric said finally. "Once the trial is public, once everyone knows what happened, there's no going back. Vespera will be exposed, Ronan will be executed, and you'll be the queen who brought them both down. Is that what bothers you? That I'll have power? No. What bothers me is that you don't understand how dangerous power makes you." Malric set his glass down. "Right now the court sees you as weak, an exile, someone I married out of political necessity. But tomorrow, when they watch you destroy 2 people who thought they were untouchable, they'll see you differently. They'll see you as a threat." "Good." Seraphine. His voice was serious, soft. "When people fear you, they don't just hate you. They try to remove you. And I can't protect you from everything. I'm not asking you to protect me." "I know, that's what worries me." Malric moved closer. His pale eyes caught moonlight. "You're not weak. You're not helpless. You're dangerous as hell, and you don't even realize it yet. That makes you either the best queen Nightspire has ever had, or the one who burns it to the ground. Which do you think I'll be?" "I don't know." Malric's hand came up, fingers brushing her cheek. "But I'm looking forward to finding out." He kissed her. Not like he had during the ceremony. Not formal or political or for show. This was real. Raw. A claiming that had nothing to do with crowns or bargains or necessity. Seraphine kissed him back, felt something inside her crack open. Not breaking. Transforming. When they finally pulled apart, Malric rested his forehead against hers. "Tomorrow," he said quietly. "After the trial. After everything ends. We'll talk about what comes next. What if there is no next? There's always a next. The question is whether we survive long enough to see it." He left, and Seraphine stood alone in the darkness, tasting his lips on hers and wondering if she'd just made another bargain she didn't fully understand. Bamo. The trial began at dawn. The throne room was packed. Every noble, every pack leader, every courtier who could fit through the doors crammed into the space until the air itself felt suffocating. And at the center of it all, in chains and silver restraints that burned his skin, knelt Ronan. Malric sat on his throne, Seraphine beside him. Her crown felt heavier than ever. The charges were read: treason, conspiracy, murder, rebellion. Each one documented, each one proven. Witnesses came forward, survivors, guards, even some of Ronan's former pack members who turned on him when the truth came out. And through it all, Ronan said nothing. He just knelt there, staring at Seraphine with eyes that held no remorse, no regret, just cold acceptance. Then Lord Davron stood. "Your Majesty, there's one more matter." He gestured, and guards dragged someone else forward. A woman in chains, her crimson dress torn, her dark hair matted with blood. Lady Vespera Thorn. The court erupted. Seraphine's heart stopped. They'd found her. Vespera looked different without her makeup and jewelry and carefully arranged mask of nobility. She looked smaller, older, human in a way that made her somehow more terrifying. Her eyes found Seraphine's across the room, and she smiled. Evidence was presented. Documents, testimonies, proof of the spell she'd cast, proof of her conspiracy with Ronan, proof of everything she'd done to break Seraphine's bond and steal her life. The court listened in horrified silence. When it was finished, Malric stood. His voice filled the chamber. Lady Vespera Thorn. Ronan Ashmore. You stand accused of crimes against the crown, against pack law, against every oath you ever swore. The evidence is clear. The law is absolute. He paused. Do you have anything to say? Vespera spoke first. Her voice was calm, almost amused. Only that I regret nothing. I saw an opportunity. I took it. Isn't that what we're taught? That strength means taking what you want? That power goes to those bold enough to seize it? She looked at Seraphine. I'm not sorry I broke your bond, girl. I'm sorry I didn't break you with it. The guards moved to drag her back, but Ronan spoke. His voice was rough, broken, but loud enough to carry. I loved you. The words hung in the air. Seraphine felt them hit like a physical blow. Ronan's eyes were on her. Only her. I loved you, he said again, but I loved the idea of power more. And when Vespera offered me a choice, I chose wrong. I know that now. I knew it then. But I was weak. Too weak to choose you, too greedy to walk away, and every moment since has been punishment for that choice. So kill me. Execute me. Do whatever justice demands. Just know that I died understanding exactly what I lost. The throne room was silent. Seraphine stood. Every eye turned to her. Malric watched, waiting. She walked down the steps, crossed to where Ronan knelt, looked down at the man who destroyed her life, and spoke words that came from somewhere deeper than rage. You're right. You did lose me, but not because you chose power, because you never valued what we had enough to fight for it. And that's the difference between you and me. I didn't choose power over love. I chose survival over the fantasy that love from someone like you was worth dying for. She turned back to Malric. The crown demands justice. Let it be served. Malric stood. His voice was final, absolute. Ronan Ashmore, Lady Vespera Thorn, you are found guilty. The sentence is death for one, and for the other, something worse. Vespera's smile faltered. Execution is mercy, Malric said quietly, and you don't deserve mercy. Your titles are stripped. Your name is erased. Your magic is severed, and you will be exiled beyond the wastelands to live powerless and forgotten until nature claims what I choose not to. Vespera's face went white. For someone who'd built an empire on legacy and influence, obscurity was a fate worse than death. She screamed as they dragged her away, curses and threats and promises that echoed through the throne room until the doors slammed shut and cut her off mid-word. Ronan was taken to the courtyard. The execution was swift, professional, a single blade, a single stroke. And he was gone. Seraphine watched from the balcony, felt nothing, no grief, no relief, just emptiness. Malric stood beside her, silent, solid. Is it always like this? She asked quietly. Justice? No. Sometimes it feels right. Most of the time it just feels necessary. They stood together as the sun rose higher and the crowd dispersed, and life in Nightspire continued the way it always did. Relentless, unforgiving, real. And Seraphine realized something that changed everything. She wasn't the broken exile anymore. She wasn't the nobody who'd stumbled into a crown. She was the queen who'd survived. And survival, she was learning, was the most dangerous weapon of all. The week after the execution felt like the calm before an avalanche. Seraphine walked the corridors of Nightspire and felt eyes tracking her movements like predators watching prey. The whispers followed her everywhere. Some called her ruthless. Others called her justice incarnate. A few called her worse things in languages they thought she didn't understand. She understood all of them. Power had a way of sharpening the senses, making you notice things you'd once overlooked. The way servants averted their eyes too quickly. The way nobles smiled with their mouths but not their faces. The way the air itself felt heavier in certain rooms, like violence was always just one wrong word away. Malric had been right about one thing. Being queen made her dangerous, and dangerous things got hunted. She sat in the council chamber 3 days after Ronan's death, listening to reports about grain shipments and border disputes, and a dozen other things that seemed impossibly trivial compared to watching a man die. Lord Davern droned on about tax collections. Lord Garrett complained about pact territories. Others argued over trade routes and military rotations. And through it all, Seraphine watched Malric. He sat at the head of the table like a statue carved from ice. His face revealed nothing. His pale eyes tracked every speaker with the focus of someone who'd learned long ago that the moment you stopped paying attention was the moment someone tried to kill you. But there was something else there too. Something Seraphine was only beginning to recognize. Exhaustion. Not physical, deeper. The kind that settled into bones and stayed there. The weight of making decisions that destroyed lives. Of being the person everyone looked to for answers when there were no good answers left. The meeting ended. The council members filed out. Malric stood and walked to the window. He didn't speak. Seraphine joined him. The view overlooked the training yards where soldiers drilled in formations that looked more like war dances than practice. Beyond them, the city sprawled across the valley. Thousands of lives. Thousands of people who depended on the man standing beside her to keep them safe. "How do you do it?" she asked quietly. "Do what?" "Carry all of this." "The kingdom. The decisions. The weight." Malric was silent for a long moment. Then he spoke, his voice low and raw in a way she'd never heard before. "You learn to stop thinking of them as people, the ones who die because of your choices. You learn to think of them as numbers, necessary losses, acceptable costs. Because the moment you let yourself feel every death, every execution, every casualty, you break. And broken kings don't keep kingdoms safe, they just bury them slower." The words hit like stones. Seraphine had killed before. The wolf in the forest, the rogues in the camp. But those had been survival, instinct. This was different. This was the cold mathematics of power, the brutal arithmetic that said some lives mattered less than others because the alternative was chaos. "Is that what I am to you?" she asked. "A number?" "No." Malric turned to face her. His eyes held something she couldn't quite name. "You're the mistake I made by letting myself care." Before she could respond, the door burst open. A guard stumbled in, breathing hard, his face pale. "Your Majesty, there's been an attack." "Where?" Malric's voice went cold, controlled. "The eastern outpost, the one near the rogue territories. It's gone. Burned. Everyone inside dead." "How many?" 43. "Soldiers. Civilians. Children." The last word hung in the air like a curse. Malric's jaw tightened. "Who?" "We don't know. The survivors said they came at night, fast, organized, like they knew exactly where the guards were stationed." The guards swallowed hard. They left a message carved into the gates. "What message?" "Justice for the fallen, death to the false queen." Every eye in the room turned to Seraphine. She felt the weight of their stares, the accusation, the blame. This was because of her, because she'd demanded Ronan's execution, because she'd exposed Vespera, because she'd climbed from exile to queen and made enemies who wouldn't forgive or forget. 43 dead. Children dead. Because of her. Malric's voice cut through her spiraling thoughts. "Assemble the war council, now. Send scouts to every border. Double the guard on the citadel, and find me whoever did this." The guard saluted and ran. Malric turned to Seraphine. His expression was unreadable. "Go to your chambers. Stay there until I send for you." "No." Her voice came out stronger than she felt. "This is my fault. You should do what I'm telling you. This isn't a request." Malric stepped closer. His presence filled the space between them. "Someone just declared war on you, which means they declared war on me. And I need you alive to figure out who and why. So go, now." Seraphine wanted to argue, wanted to demand a place at the war table, wanted to prove she wasn't weak or helpless, or the fragile thing they all thought she was. But Malric's eyes held something that stopped her. Fear. Not for himself, for her. She left. The corridors felt longer than usual, darker. Every shadow looked like it might hide a blade. Every servant looked like a potential assassin. By the time she reached her chambers, her hands were shaking. Mira was already there. The young servant took one look at Seraphine's face and immediately began preparing tea with hands that moved too fast. Too nervous. "You heard," Seraphine said. It wasn't a question. The whole citadel heard. Mira poured tea and set it on the table. "They're saying it's retaliation, that Ronan's followers are rising up, that you brought this on the kingdom. Do you believe that?" Mira hesitated. Then she met Seraphine's eyes. "I believe you did what you had to do, and I believe people who were looking for an excuse to hate you found one." "That's not an answer." "Yes, it is. You just don't like it." Mira sat down across from her. "Your Majesty, can I speak plainly? Have you ever done anything else?" A small smile. "Fair." Mira leaned forward. "You're not safe here. Not anymore. There are people in this court who want you dead, who wanted you dead the moment you put on that crown, and now they have an excuse, a cause. They'll call it justice, vengeance, protection of the realm, but it's just murder dressed in pretty words. Who? Give me names. I can't. Because I don't know who to trust anymore. Mira's voice dropped. But I know this. The attack was too coordinated, too precise. Someone gave them information, someone inside these walls. A traitor. The word tasted like poison. Seraphine had faced exile, betrayal, the death of her mate. But this was different. This was someone in Nightspire itself working to destroy her. Someone who smiled at council meetings and bowed in corridors and waited for the perfect moment to strike. Who would gain from my death? She asked quietly. Everyone who wants things to go back to the way they were, when the king ruled alone, when power stayed in the old families, when queens were decorative and silent and easily controlled. Mira stood. You change things by existing, and change is the one thing these people fear more than death. A knock at the door made them both freeze. Mira crossed to the door, opened it slightly, then stepped back. It's the king. Malric entered. He looked worse than before, lines of tension carved into his face, his jaw tight enough to crack teeth. He nodded to Mira. Leave us. She bowed and disappeared. Malric waited until the door closed. Then he turned to Seraphine and spoke words that made her blood run cold. The attack was coordinated with someone inside the citadel. We found correspondence, coded messages, plans. He paused. Someone on my council sold us out. Who? We don't know yet. But whoever it is has been working against us for months, maybe longer, feeding information to the rogues, undermining my authority, and now targeting you specifically. Why me? Because you're the crack in my armor. Malric's voice was rough. I've ruled for 10 years through fear and control and absolute authority. No one could touch me because I had no weaknesses, no attachments, no one I cared about more than the crown. And then I married you. And suddenly I have something they can use against me. The words landed like a physical blow. You're saying I made you weak. I'm saying you made me human. Malric moved closer. And humans can be broken in ways monsters can't. So what do? We find the traitor. We execute them. And we make it clear that anyone who comes after you comes after me. He reached out, his hand cupping her face. I won't let them take you. I don't care if I have to burn the kingdom to ash. You survive. That's the only rule that matters now. And if the cost is too high, then I pay it. His thumb brushed across her cheekbone. A king who won't sacrifice for the people he claims to protect isn't a king. He's a coward wearing a crown. He kissed her then. Hard, desperate, like he was trying to memorize the shape of her mouth in case he never got the chance again. When he pulled away, his eyes were cold fire. Stay here. Trust no one, not even the people you think are loyal. Until we know who's behind this, everyone is a threat. He left, and Seraphine sat alone in the darkness, feeling the walls of Nightspire close in around her like a tomb. The next 3 days were hell dressed as normalcy. Court continued. Meals were served, councils met. But underneath the routine, tension coiled like a snake ready to strike. Guards doubled on every door. Servants were questioned. Council members watched each other with the suspicion of people who knew one of them was a traitor, but couldn't figure out which. Seraphine attended every meeting, sat beside Malric, played her part as queen, and watched. She watched Lord Davern, who'd insulted her the first night and never quite managed to hide his disdain. She watched Lord Garrett, who'd wanted her exiled and still looked at her like she was a stain on the throne. She watched the others, the advisors, the military commanders, the nobles who smiled too much and spoke too little. One of them was the traitor. One of them wanted her dead. On the 4th day, they found the first clue. A servant was caught carrying a sealed letter out of the citadel. The guards brought him to the throne room in chains. He was young, terrified, shaking so hard his teeth chattered. Malric stood before him like judgment incarnate. Who gave you this letter? The servant wouldn't speak. Malric gestured. A guard stepped forward and broke the servant's finger with a casual efficiency that made Seraphine's stomach turn. The servant screamed, Who gave you this letter? I don't know, I swear. They left it in my quarters with gold and instructions. I never saw their face. Malric took the letter, broke the seal, read it in silence. Then his face went dark. He handed it to Seraphine. The words were simple. brutal. The false queen dies at the harvest moon. Make sure the king is watching. Seraphine's hands went numb. The harvest moon was in 2 days. When? Malric's voice was quiet, deadly. When did you receive this? 3 days ago, and you said nothing. They threatened my family, said if I spoke, my children would burn. The throne room was silent. Malric studied the servant for a long moment. Then he spoke words that made Seraphine's chest tighten. Your family will be protected, relocated to the southern territories under guard. You will serve time in the dungeons for conspiring against the crown, but you won't die. Not today. The servant collapsed in relief. Thank you, your majesty. Malric waved him away. Then he turned to the council. We have 2 days. Find me the traitor, or I'll assume you're all guilty and execute accordingly. The council members went pale. They filed out in hurried silence. Malric sank into his throne. His head fell back against the iron. He looked more tired than Seraphine had ever seen him. She crossed to him, placed a hand on his shoulder. We'll find them. Will we? Because I'm starting to think it doesn't matter. Kill one traitor and 3 more take their place. It never ends. Malric's voice was hollow. This is what ruling is. Endless threat, endless paranoia, endless sacrifice. And for what? So people can sleep safely while I count the dead? You're keeping them alive. Am I? Or am I just postponing their deaths until the next attack? The next rebellion? The next war? Malric's eyes found hers. Sometimes I think the only honest thing a king can do is admit that power is just organized violence, and we're all just pretending it's something nobler. The words hit deep, because Seraphine was beginning to understand the truth. Crowns didn't make you powerful. They made you a target. And targets, sooner or later, got hit. The next day brought worse news. Another attack. This time closer. A supply caravan 20 miles from the citadel. Burned. The drivers killed. And another message left behind. 2 days until justice. The court was in chaos. Nobles demanded increased security. Pack leaders called for military action. Some suggested negotiating with whoever was behind the attacks. Others wanted blood. And through it all, Seraphine felt the weight of every stare. This was her fault. She'd wanted vengeance, demanded it, and now innocent people were dying because she'd been selfish enough to think justice was worth the cost. That night, she couldn't sleep. She stood at the window, watching the moon rise over the valley, and wondered if this was how it would end. Not with glory or triumph, just more death, more blood, more names carved into stone as reminders that crowns were paid for with lives that weren't your own. A sound behind her. She turned, hand reaching for the knife she now kept on her at all times. Mira stood in the doorway. Her face was white, her hands trembling. Your Majesty, you need to leave. Now. What? They found the traitor. Mira's voice broke. And you're not going to believe who it is. Seraphine's heart stopped. Who? Mira's next word shattered everything. It's someone close to the king, someone he trusted, someone who's been with him for years. Seraphine felt cold spread through her chest. Who, Mira? Lord Kael, the king's personal advisor, his closest friend, the man who stood beside him through every war, every decision, every moment since he took the throne. Mira swallowed hard. They found proof. Letters, plans, everything. He's been working against the crown for over a year. And the Harvest Moon attack? It's a trap. They're planning to kill you when you appear in public, and they're planning to frame the king for allowing it. The room tilted. Lord Kael. Seraphine had seen him a dozen times. Tall, quiet, always standing just behind Malric's right shoulder. The kind of man who faded into backgrounds but seemed essential, trusted, loyal, a traitor. Where's Malric? In the council chamber with Kael. They're interrogating him now. Mira stepped forward. Your Majesty, you need to run. If Kael was willing to betray the king, he has contingencies, backup plans, and you're the primary target. I'm not running, then you're going to die. Maybe. Seraphine grabbed her cloak. But I'm not dying without answers. She ran, through corridors and downstairs and across courtyards until she reached the council chamber. Guards blocked the door. Let me through. Your Majesty, the king said. I don't care what he said. Move. They hesitated, then stepped aside. Seraphine burst through the doors. The scene inside was worse than she'd imagined. Lord Kale knelt in the center of the room, hands bound, face bloodied. Around him stood Malric and half the War Council. And on the table between them lay stacks of papers covered in handwriting she recognized from 100 council meetings. Proof. Malric looked up when she entered. His face was stone. Get out. No. Seraphine. I said no. She walked to the table, picked up one of the letters, read it, felt rage and grief and something colder settle in her chest. He's been planning this for over a year, every attack, every death, all of it coordinated, all of it calculated to make me look like the problem. Malric didn't speak. Seraphine turned to Kael. Why? The advisor looked up. His face was a mess of bruises and blood, but his eyes were clear, focused, almost amused. Because you don't belong here. His voice was steady. You're an exile, a nobody, and you corrupted the one man who could have led this kingdom to greatness. Corrupted? He was pure before you. Kael's lip curled, cold, efficient, untouchable. And then you crawled into his bed and made him weak, made him care. And caring kings make mistakes. They hesitate. They compromise. They let emotion cloud judgment. You turned the strongest alpha alive into just another man. Seraphine stared at him. Then she laughed. It was a harsh, ugly sound. You think he was pure? You think ruling through fear and isolation was strength? That's not purity. That's cowardice. He was alone because he was afraid to trust anyone, afraid to be human. And the moment he found someone who saw past the crown to the man underneath, you couldn't handle it. Kael spat blood. You're a disease, and diseases get cut out. Then cut me out. Seraphine stepped closer. Right now, right here. You want me dead? Do it yourself instead of hiding behind rogues and coded letters and attacks on innocent people. Kael smiled. It was the smile of someone who'd already won. I don't need to kill you. You'll die tomorrow anyway. The Harvest Moon ceremony is compromised. My people are already in place. The moment you step outside these walls, you're dead. And there's nothing you can do to stop it. Seraphine felt something cold settle in her bones. This wasn't just a betrayal. It was checkmate. Malric spoke for the first time. His voice was quiet, deadly. How many? Kael's smile widened. Enough. Positioned in the crowd, on the rooftops, in the guard rotations. You can't cancel the ceremony without looking weak, and you can't protect her without revealing you know about the trap. Either way, she dies. Either way, you lose. The room was silent. Seraphine looked at Malric, saw the calculation in his eyes, the brutal mathematics of power. Cancel the ceremony and look weak, appear and risk her death. Hide and prove Kael right that she'd made him soft. No good options, just varying degrees of catastrophe. Then Seraphine spoke words that changed everything. We don't cancel. We move forward, but we change the script. What? Malric stared at her. They're expecting me to appear as the vulnerable queen, the target, the weakness you're trying to protect. She met his eyes. So we give them the opposite. We make me the trap. You're insane, probably, but it's the only move that makes sense. Seraphine turned to the council. They want me dead to prove you're weak, that marrying me was a mistake, that I corrupted the great Alpha King, so we prove them wrong. We show them exactly what kind of queen sits beside you. Not a victim, not a weakness. A weapon. How? Lord Davron asked. His voice was skeptical. By walking into that ceremony knowing it's a trap. By standing in the open while assassins line up their shots. And by surviving. She looked at Malric. They think I'm your weakness. Let's show them I'm your greatest strength. Malric studied her. Then something shifted in his expression. Not quite a smile. Close enough? You're absolutely insane, probably. And if you die, then you were right. I was a weakness after all. Seraphine's voice was steady. But I'd rather die proving I wasn't than live knowing I ran. The War Council erupted in argument. Half thought it was brilliant, half thought it was suicide. All of them looked at Malric for the final decision. He stood, walked to Seraphine, placed both hands on her shoulders. If we do this, if we walk into that ceremony knowing what's waiting, there's no going back. No changing the plan. No retreat. You understand? I understand. And if I lose you? You won't. Seraphine's hand came up, covering his. Because I didn't survive exile and betrayal and becoming queen just to die, proving a point to people too afraid to face me directly. Malric kissed her, hard, desperate, final. Then he turned to the council. We move forward. Double the real guards in positions Kael doesn't know about. Plant false intel that we're changing the ceremony time. And anyone wearing Kael's colors gets arrested on sight. He looked at Kael. As for you, you'll watch from the dungeons. And when your plan fails, when my queen survives and your assassins are dead, you'll spend whatever's left of your miserable life understanding exactly how badly you miscalculated. Kael's smile finally faded. Seraphine felt something settle inside her. Not peace, not confidence, but something harder, colder. Acceptance. She'd walked into Nightspire asking for vengeance. Now she was about to become it. The harvest moon rose blood red over the citadel. The ceremony grounds were packed. Thousands of people filling the courtyard and the streets beyond. Nobles in fine clothes, commoners in simple garb, soldiers lining the walls, all of them waiting to see their queen, to see if she'd survive. Seraphine stood in the preparation chamber, dressed in armor disguised as a gown, black silk reinforced with thin plates of steel, a crown that doubled as a weapon, boots with blades hidden in the heels. She looked like a queen. She was dressed for war. Malric entered. He wore full battle armor, no pretense, no disguise. He looked like the warlord he'd been before the crown, the killer underneath the king. Ready? He asked. No, but I'm doing it anyway. That's what makes you dangerous. He crossed to her, took her hand. When we walk out there, stay close. The moment anything happens, you run. You don't fight. You don't hesitate. You run, and you let me handle it. Seraphine squeezed his hand. We're in this together, or not at all? Seraphine, together. She met his eyes. Or I walk out there alone. Malric was silent. Then he nodded. Together. They walked to the doors. Beyond them, the crowd roared. The doors opened. Light flooded in. The sound of thousands of voices rose like a wave. Seraphine stepped forward, Malric beside her, and felt every eye in the courtyard lock onto her. Somewhere in that crowd were assassins, people paid to kill her, to prove she was weak, that she didn't belong, that Malric had made a mistake. She smiled. Let them try. They walked through the crowd toward the dais. People bowed. Some cheered. Others stared in hostile silence. And with every step, Seraphine felt the weight of a dozen invisible crosshairs tracking her movement. This was what power felt like. Not safety, not comfort, just the constant knowledge that someone was always looking for an angle, a weakness, a moment to strike. They reached the dais, climbed the steps, turned to face the crowd. Malric spoke. His voice carried across the courtyard like thunder. People of Nightspire, tonight we celebrate the harvest moon, a time of plenty, of gratitude, of unity. The crowd murmured agreement. Malric continued. But tonight is also a reminder that unity is earned, not given. That strength comes not from standing alone, but from standing together. He looked at Seraphine. Your queen has faced exile, betrayal, death threats, and she stands before you now not because I protected her, but because she refused to break. The crowd's murmur grew louder. Some cheered, some stayed silent. Seraphine scanned the faces, looking for movement, for the telltale shift that meant someone was reaching for a weapon. There. A figure on the rooftop across the courtyard, barely visible, but she caught the glint of metal, the slow movement of someone taking aim. She didn't look away, didn't flinch, just stared directly at the figure and dared them to take the shot. The assassin fired. The bolt screamed through the air. Seraphine moved, not away, toward. She stepped in front of Malric as the bolt passed through the space where her head had been a heartbeat before. It buried itself in the wooden pillar behind the throne. Chaos erupted. Guards swarmed the rooftops. Screams filled the courtyard. More assassins revealed themselves, trying to flee now that their cover was blown. But Malric's guards were ready. They'd been waiting, hidden in positions Kael never knew about. They dropped from shadows and closed in on the assassins like wolves on wounded prey. The fight was brutal and brief. Within minutes, it was over. 7 assassins captured, 3 dead. The rest of the crowd pushed back by soldiers, forming a protective wall around the dais. Seraphine stood in the center of it all, breathing hard, adrenaline singing through her veins. She'd survived. They tried to kill her in front of the entire kingdom, and she'd survived. Malric grabbed her shoulders. "Are you hurt?" "No." She met his eyes. They missed. They all missed. Malric's voice was rough, fierce. "Because you didn't run. You stood there and dared them to try. That was the plan. The hell with the plan. You almost died, but I didn't." Seraphine turned to face the crowd, the people staring at her with wide eyes and open mouths. She raised her voice. "Let this be a lesson. To anyone who thinks the queen is weak, to anyone who thinks I don't belong. I walked into a trap knowing it was waiting, and I'm still standing. So come for me if you want. But understand that I don't break easily, and I sure as hell don't run." The courtyard was silent. Then someone cheered. Then another. Then the roar spread through the crowd like wildfire, until half the courtyard was screaming their approval, and the other half was too shocked to do anything but stare. Seraphine had gambled everything, and she'd won. The aftermath lasted hours. The captured assassins were interrogated. Names were extracted. A network of conspirators uncovered that reached deeper into the court than anyone had expected. Lord Kyle had been the architect, but he'd had help. Nobles who resented the king's absolute power, pack leaders who wanted the old ways restored, merchants who'd lost influence when Malric consolidated trade. A dozen traitors in total, all of them arrested, all of them facing execution. And through it all, Seraphine stood beside Malric and watched an empire tear itself apart from the inside. Because that was what crowns did. They didn't unite people. They forced them to choose sides. And the ones who chose wrong paid for it in blood. By the time dawn broke, the dungeons were full and the court was decimated. Half the council gone. A quarter of the military leadership arrested. Entire noble families disgraced. The kingdom had survived, but at a cost that left scars too deep to measure. Seraphine stood on the balcony of the royal chambers, watching the sun rise over a citadel that looked more like a battlefield than a palace. Malric joined her, silent, exhausted, bloodstained. "Is it always like this?" she asked quietly. "Power? Worse, usually." Malric's voice was hollow. "Tonight was clean, surgical. Most of the time it's slower, messier. You watch people rot from the inside and can't do anything until they act. And by then, more are dead than need to be. Why do you do it? Because someone has to. And I'm too stubborn to let anyone else carry the weight." They stood in silence as the sun climbed higher. Then Seraphine spoke words that she knew would change everything. "I can't do this." Malric turned to her. "What?" "This. All of it. The court. The constant threat. The knowledge that people want me dead, and I have to smile at them across council tables." She met his eyes. "I thought I wanted revenge, justice, a crown. But what I really wanted was to matter, to be seen as more than the broken wolf everyone discarded. And now I am. Now I'm the queen, and it's killing me." The words hung between them, raw, true, brutal. Malric's expression was unreadable. "Then what do you want?" "I want to stop being afraid. Stop looking over my shoulder. Stop wondering if the next meal is poisoned or the next ceremony is a trap." She turned to face him fully. "I want to become something they can't kill, can't break, can't dismiss. And the only way to do that is to stop playing their game by their rules." "What are you saying?" "I'm saying I'm done being the victim they tried to make me. The exile, the broken mate, the corrupted queen." She felt something hard settle in her chest. "I'm going to become exactly what they're afraid of. Not weak, not soft. Not the king's conscience or his leash, something worse." Malric studied her. Then he smiled. It was cold, sharp, dangerous, good. "Because the queen I need isn't gentle. She's the woman who walked into a trap and dared it to spring. The one who stood in front of an assassin's bolt and didn't flinch. That's not who I was." "No." Malric stepped closer. "But it's who you're becoming, and that terrifies them more than anything I could ever do." Seraphine felt the last piece of her old self crack and fall away. She wasn't Seraphine Vale anymore. The exile. The victim. the woman who'd begged for justice. She was the queen who'd walked through fire and decided to become the flame, and that, she realized, was the most dangerous thing she could be. Not loved, not feared, but inevitable. The kind of force that didn't ask permission, didn't apologize, didn't break, just endured and conquered and survived, no matter what it cost. The weeks after the Harvest Moon assassination attempt didn't bring peace. They brought war. Not the kind fought with armies and battlefields. The kind that happened in council chambers and dark corridors and whispered conversations that ended with bodies found in places they shouldn't be. The kind where every meal might be your last and every ally might be waiting for the right moment to put a knife in your back. Seraphine learned to sleep with one eye open. Learned to taste wine before drinking it. Learned to read the micro-expressions on faces that told her whether someone was about to strike or retreat. And most importantly, she learned that survival wasn't about being the strongest or the smartest. It was about being willing to do what others wouldn't. The court had fractured after Kael's betrayal. Some nobles remained loyal to Malric out of fear, others out of genuine respect. But a third faction had emerged, quieter, more dangerous, led by nobles who believed the king had grown weak by taking a queen at all. That mercy and attachment were diseases that would spread through the empire until nothing remained but sentiment and collapse. Lord Davron led them, the same man who'd insulted Seraphine on her wedding night. He was careful, smart. He never said anything overtly treasonous, never crossed lines that would justify execution. He just smiled and agreed in council meetings while working behind the scenes to undermine every decision Malric made. And Seraphine watched him, studied him, waited for him to make a mistake. Because predators always made mistakes when they thought their prey was too weak to fight back. The opportunity came 3 weeks after the Harvest Moon. Reports arrived from the Western Territories. A pack rebellion. Not rogues this time. Organized wolves from established families who'd declared independence from the crown. They'd seized control of 3 border towns and fortified them against retaliation. The council met to discuss response. Malric sat at the head of the table, his face carved from ice. Seraphine beside him. Around them, the remaining council members argued strategy with the kind of careful language that said everything while revealing nothing. Lord Davron spoke first. His voice was smooth, reasonable. Your Majesty, perhaps we should consider negotiation. These are established pacts, families with history. If we can bring them back into the fold without bloodshed— They declared independence, Malric said quietly. They burned the king's banner. They killed my soldiers. There's nothing to negotiate. But Your Majesty, surely there's room for— No. The word cut like a blade. They made their choice. Now they face the consequences. Davron's smile never wavered. Of course, Your Majesty. I only suggest that showing mercy might encourage others to return to loyalty rather than forcing them to fight to the death. The others murmured agreement. Some louder than others. Seraphine felt the shift in the room. The way eyes that had been watching Malric now turned to Davron, the way spines straightened, the way the balance of power tilted just slightly away from the throne. This was what Davron wanted. Not open rebellion, just slow erosion, making Malric look unreasonable, brutal, out of touch. Until one day the council would meet and decide that perhaps a different king might serve them better. She spoke before Malric could respond. Lord Davron raises an interesting point. Her voice was calm, measured, about mercy, about bringing rebels back into the fold. But I wonder if he's considered what message that sends. Every eye turned to her. Davron's smile tightened. What message would that be, Your Majesty? That rebellion has no cost. That you can declare independence, kill the king's soldiers, burn his banners, and all you risk is a conversation. Seraphine leaned forward. Tell me, Lord Davron, in your experience, how many rebellions are prevented by showing that rebellion is negotiable? The room went silent. Davron's expression hardened. I simply believe that strength can be shown through mercy as well as violence. Can it? Or does mercy just convince your enemies that you're too weak to do what's necessary? Seraphine held his gaze. Because from where I'm sitting, every time we've shown mercy, we've been repaid with another attack, another betrayal, another plot to destroy what we're trying to build. So perhaps the question isn't whether we should show mercy, it's whether we can afford to. Davron's jaw tightened. With respect, Your Majesty, you've been queen for less than 2 months. Perhaps those of us with more experience in governance might what? Continue the same failed strategies that led to this moment? Seraphine's voice dropped, turned cold. You talk about experience, Lord Davron, but all I see is a man who survived by being agreeable, who kept his head down and his opinions flexible and his loyalty conditional. And now you sit at this table and question the king's judgment because you think his queen makes him soft, makes him vulnerable, makes him weak. The temperature in the room plummeted. Davron stood slowly. Your Majesty, I think you misunderstand. I understand perfectly. You want this rebellion handled gently because you're already planning your next move. Because if the king looks too brutal, too uncompromising, you can position yourself as the reasonable alternative, the moderate voice, the leader who might bring unity without bloodshed. Seraphine stood as well. But here's what you don't understand. I didn't survive exile and betrayal and assassination attempts by being reasonable. I survived by being willing to burn everything down before I let it be taken from me. So if you think I'm the king's weakness, test me. I dare you. The silence stretched like a blade against skin. Then Malric spoke. His voice was quiet. Final. The rebellion will be crushed, completely. Every leader executed, every family stripped of title and land, and anyone in this room who questions that decision can join them. He stood. The meeting is over. The council filed out in tense silence. Davron was the last to leave. He paused at the door and looked back at Seraphine. His expression was unreadable. You've made an enemy today, Your Majesty. Good. I was running low. He left. Malric crossed to her. That was dangerous. It was necessary. Was it? Because now Davron knows you see through him. He'll be more careful, harder to catch. Or he'll get desperate and make a mistake. Seraphine met his eyes. Either way, he's a threat, and threats don't get ignored. They get eliminated. Malric studied her. Then something shifted in his expression, something that looked almost like pride. You really have changed. Had to. The old Seraphine wouldn't have survived this long. Would she have been happier? Probably. But happiness is a luxury. And we're fresh out of those. She moved to the window. When do we march west? 3 days. I'll lead the force myself. Seraphine turned. I'm coming with you. Absolutely not. This rebellion is connected to me. They're using me as the excuse. I should be there when we end it. You should be here, safe, alive. I stopped being safe the moment I married you. Seraphine's voice was firm. And I'm not staying behind while you ride into battle. We're in this together, remember? Malric was silent for a long moment. Then he nodded once. Together. But the words sounded more like a prayer than a promise, because both of them knew that battlefields had a way of separating people permanently. Pratek. They rode west with 500 of Nightspire's best soldiers. The journey took 6 days through terrain that grew progressively more hostile. Mountains gave way to forests that gave way to rocky plains, where the wind cut like knives and the temperature dropped low enough to freeze water in canteens overnight. Seraphine rode beside Malric at the head of the column. She wore armor now, real armor. Not the decorative pieces queens wore to look regal. Heavy plate reinforced with leather and chain, a sword at her hip that she'd learned to use in the training yards, under the brutal instruction of soldiers who didn't care that she was queen. They cared that she could fight, and she could. Not expertly, not with the fluid grace of warriors who'd trained their whole lives, but with the desperate efficiency of someone who knew that hesitation meant death. The rebel stronghold came into view on the 7th day. It sat on high ground overlooking a valley, stone walls 20 feet high, guard towers at each corner. The king's banners had been torn down and replaced with black flags that snapped in the wind like harbingers of war. Malric called a halt. The army spread out across the plain below the fortress, setting up camp, preparing for siege. But siege would take weeks, maybe months, and Malric didn't have that kind of time. Every day spent here was a day Davron and his faction grew stronger back in Nightspire. A day more nobles questioned the king's authority. A day closer to open revolt. This needed to end fast. Brutal. Final. A rider approached from the fortress under a white flag. Malric received him in the command tent. Seraphine stood beside him. The rider was young, nervous. He delivered his message in a voice that shook. Lord Carden sends his regards. He says the Western Pacts have no quarrel with the king, only with the false queen who corrupted him. Surrender her to us for justice, and we will lay down arms and return to the fold." The tent was silent. Seraphine felt every eye turn to her. This was the play. The rebels didn't want war with Malric. They wanted her removed, blamed, sacrificed. And if Malric refused, if he chose her over peace, it would confirm everything Davron's faction claimed, that the king was compromised, that his judgment was clouded, that love had made him weak, checkmate in a single move. Seraphine spoke before Malric could. "Tell Lord Carden I have a counteroffer. He can surrender unconditionally within the hour, or I will personally lead the assault on his fortress and burn it to the ground with him inside." The rider's eyes went wide. "Your Majesty, Lord Carden commands 300 warriors, and I command 500, plus the most dangerous alpha alive, plus the rage of a woman who's tired of being called false by men who wouldn't recognize truth if it bit them." She leaned forward. "So here's what happens next. You ride back, you deliver my message, and you tell Carden that if he wants me, he's welcome to try. But he better kill me. Because if he doesn't, I will hunt him down and show him exactly what happens when you mistake mercy for weakness." The rider fled. Malric turned to her. "What are you doing?" "Ending this." Seraphine's voice was steady. "They want a fight? We give them one. But on our terms. Not siege. Not negotiation. Direct assault. Fast. Brutal. And when it's over, when their leaders are dead and their fortress is rubble, everyone in this kingdom will understand that the queen isn't the king's weakness. She's his wrath made flesh. That's suicide. Those walls are stone. Stone breaks." She met his eyes. "Trust me, I do. That's what terrifies me. Then be terrified after. Right now, we have work to do." The assault began at dawn. Not with battering rams or siege towers or any of the slow machinery of traditional warfare. Malric didn't have time for traditional. He had fire. Magic. And soldiers who'd been trained to fight like they were already dead and had nothing left to lose. The first wave hit the walls like a storm. Ladders slammed against stone. Soldiers climbed through a hail of arrows and boiling oil, and rocks dropped from above. Half of them died before reaching the ramparts. The other half fought like demons. Seraphine led the second wave, not from the rear, not from some safe command position. She climbed a ladder with a sword in one hand and murder in her heart. An arrow grazed her shoulder. A rock nearly took her head off. She didn't stop, didn't slow, just climbed until she reached the top and hauled herself over the wall into chaos. The ramparts were hell. Steel rang against steel. Men screamed. Blood made the stone slick and treacherous. A rebel soldier lunged at her. She sidestepped, brought her sword down, felt it bite deep. He fell. Another came. Then another. She fought without thinking. Pure instinct and training, and the desperate knowledge that hesitation meant death. Around her, Nightspire soldiers poured over the walls. The rebels fought hard, but they were outnumbered and outmatched and facing warriors who'd been forged in Malric's brutal military machine. The gates fell within an hour. The courtyard became a slaughterhouse as Malric's forces flooded in. The rebels tried to form defensive lines, tried to hold strategic positions. It didn't matter. Malric moved through them like a force of nature. His sword cut through armor and flesh and bone like they were paper. His presence on the battlefield was gravity itself, pulling, crushing, inevitable. Seraphine fought her way toward the central keep where the rebel leaders would be holed up. A dozen rebels tried to stop her. She killed 3 herself. Her soldiers killed the rest. By the time they reached the keep doors, she was covered in blood. Some of it hers, most of it not. The doors were barred from inside. She didn't knock, didn't ask for surrender, just nodded to the soldiers carrying the battering ram and let them work. The doors splintered, broke, fell inward. Inside, Lord Carden and his commanders waited. 20 men, armed and desperate. Carden was older than she expected, gray-haired, scarred. The kind of man who'd seen enough war to know when he was looking at his death. He raised his sword anyway. "I won't surrender to a false queen, then die to a real one." They fought, not with grace or skill or the choreographed beauty of trained warriors. This was ugly, brutal, 2 fighters hacking at each other with everything they had because only one was walking out alive. Carden was stronger, faster, more experienced, but Seraphine was angrier. And anger, she'd learned, was its own kind of weapon. It didn't tire, didn't question, just burned until there was nothing left but ash. She feinted left. He bought it. She drove her blade into the gap between his armor plates and felt it sink deep. His eyes went wide. Blood bubbled from his mouth. He tried to speak, failed, fell. The other commanders dropped their weapons. Seraphine stood over Carden's body, breathing hard, her sword dripping red. Anyone else want to question whether I'm their queen? Silence. She turned and walked out of the keep into sunlight that felt too bright, too clean. The courtyard was filled with bodies and wounded soldiers, and the aftermath of violence that never looked as noble as legends claimed. Malric found her standing near the broken gates. He was covered in blood and gore. His face was grim. "It's done?" She nodded. "Carden's dead. The others surrendered. And you?" "I'm alive." "That's not what I asked." Seraphine looked at him, really looked at him, and saw the same exhaustion she felt reflected in his eyes, the same hollowness that came from doing necessary things that carved pieces out of your soul. "I don't know," she said quietly. "Ask me when I can stop killing people." "That might be never. Then I guess we'll find out what's left of me when it's over." Malric pulled her close. His arms were solid, real, the only anchor in a world that felt like it was spinning too fast. "You're still here," he said against her hair. "That's what matters. Everything else we figure out later." They stood like that for a long moment. Two blood-stained rulers holding each other in the wreckage of a battle that had solved nothing and cost everything. Then a soldier approached. "Your Majesty, we found something in the keep." "Letters. Correspondence between Carden and someone in Nightspire." "Who?" The soldier's face was pale. "Lord Davron." Of course it was. Seraphine felt something cold settle in her chest. Not surprise. Confirmation. Davron hadn't just been undermining them in court. He'd been actively supporting the rebellion, funding it, coordinating it, using it as a tool to make Malric look weak and violent and unfit to rule. "Bring me the letters," Malric said. The soldier handed them over. Malric read them in silence. His expression darkened with each line. Then he looked at Seraphine. "We ride back to Nightspire tonight. No rest. No delay. If Davron knows we found these, he'll either flee or make his move." "What move?" "The one where he tries to take the throne." Malric's voice was flat. "These letters make it clear. He's been building a coalition, nobles, military officers, even some of the guard. He's been waiting for the right moment to strike. And the moment we left for this battle, he started moving pieces into place. A coup." The word hung between them like a blade. Seraphine felt exhaustion try to drag her down. They just fought a battle, won a war, and now they had to ride back and fight another one before their enemies consolidated power. This was what ruling meant, not glory, not victory, just endless conflict with enemies that multiplied faster than you could kill them. "How long do we have?" she asked. "Days, maybe less." Malric handed the letters back to the soldier. "Send riders ahead, fast horses. Tell Commander Thrace to lock down the citadel, no one in or out, and arrest anyone who moves against the crown. And if they resist, execute them." The soldier saluted and ran. Malric turned to Seraphine. "Can you ride? I just killed a rebel lord and fought my way through a fortress. I can ride. Then we move now. Because if we're not back in Nightspire within 3 days, there might not be a throne left to save." They rode through the night and the next day and the night after that. 500 soldiers pushed to the edge of endurance. Horses were rotated. Rest was measured in minutes. Food was eaten in the saddle. The world became a blur of exhaustion and determination, and the slow grinding certainty that they might already be too late. On the third day, they saw smoke on the horizon, black smoke rising from where Nightspire should be. Malric pushed his horse harder. The army followed. They crested the final ridge and saw the truth. Nightspire was under siege. Not from outside, from within. The citadel gates were closed. Soldiers fought soldiers in the streets. Buildings burned. And flying from the highest tower was a new banner. Not the silver wolf of the king. A golden eagle. Davron's family crest. He'd made his move. Declared himself Lord Protector. Claimed the king had abandoned his people to chase personal vengeance. that the queen had corrupted him beyond redemption, that for the good of the realm, a new leader was required, a coup disguised as salvation. Malric's face was stone. His voice when he spoke could have cut steel. Kill anyone flying that banner, no exceptions, no mercy. We take back the citadel or we die trying. The army charged down the hill like an avalanche of steel and rage. Seraphine rode beside Malric. Her sword was already drawn, her body screaming for rest. But rest was a luxury, and luxury was for people who had the time to care whether they survived tomorrow. They hit the city like a hammer. The fighting was immediate, brutal. Close-quarters combat in streets too narrow for horses. Soldiers turned on each other based on whose banner they followed. Citizens fled or fought or died caught in the crossfire. The city Seraphine had sworn to protect was tearing itself apart. And somewhere in the chaos, Davron was watching, waiting, knowing that even if Malric won, the cost would be high enough to break him. Because that was how you destroyed a king, not by beating him in battle, by forcing him to destroy everything he'd built to save it. They fought their way toward the citadel through streets that ran red with blood. Every block was a battle, every corner a potential ambush. Seraphine lost count of how many men she killed, how many times she nearly died. The world became a narrow tunnel of survive this moment, then the next, then the next. By the time they reached the citadel gates, half the army was gone, dead or wounded or scattered through the city fighting battles that would determine whether Nightspire survived or burned. The gates were sealed, barred from inside, and standing on the ramparts above was Lord Davron. He looked down at them with a smile that said he'd already won. "Your Majesty," his voice carried across the courtyard. "Welcome home, though I'm afraid you'll find things have changed in your absence. Open the gates, Davron." Malric's voice was deadly calm. "And maybe I'll make your death quick." "Quick?" Davron laughed. "Your Majesty, you misunderstand the situation. I hold the citadel, I hold the council, I hold the loyalty of half your army and most of your nobles. You're standing out there with a few hundred exhausted soldiers and a queen who's been the source of nothing but chaos since she arrived. You've already lost. You just don't know it yet. Then let me educate you." Malric's hand moved. A signal. Archers Seraphine hadn't noticed stepped from shadows and loosed a volley at the ramparts. Davron's guards fell. But not Davron. He'd moved. Fast. Behind cover. "Clever," Davron called out. "But not clever enough. You can try to take the citadel by force. You might even succeed. But how many more will die? How many of your own people will you slaughter to reclaim a throne that's already crumbling?" His voice turned mocking. "Or you could make the smart choice. Abdicate. Walk away. Leave with your corrupted queen and whatever's left of your pride. Let someone who actually cares about the kingdom rule it." Seraphine felt Malric tense beside her, saw the calculation in his eyes, the brutal mathematics of power. Storm the citadel and win but destroy the kingdom in the process. Or walk away and let Davron have everything, no good options, just degrees of catastrophe. She spoke before he could make a decision that would haunt him forever. "Davron?" Her voice cut through the courtyard. "You want me to leave? Want to blame everything on the false queen who corrupted your perfect king? Then let's make a deal. Single combat. You and me. Winner takes the citadel. Loser dies." The courtyard went silent. Davron's laugh was sharp. "You can't be serious." "Dead serious." Seraphine stepped forward. "You've been calling me weak since the day I arrived, claiming I don't belong, that I'm the problem. So prove it. Beat me in fair combat and I'll walk away. But if I win, you open those gates and surrender everything. And why would I agree to that? I have the advantage. Because you're a coward who hides behind walls and soldiers and political games. Because deep down you know that if you face me directly, you'll lose. And because every soldier watching from those walls will know it too." She raised her voice. "So come down here and fight me, or admit you're too scared to face the woman you claim is weak." The challenge hung in the air. For a long moment, Davron said nothing. Then the gates opened, and he walked out, sword drawn, armor polished, looking every bit the noble warrior he'd always pretended to be. Seraphine stepped forward to meet him. Behind her, Malric grabbed her arm. "You don't have to do this." "Yes, I do. This is the only way it ends." She met his eyes. "Trust me. One more time. If you die, I won't." She kissed him, hard, final, Because I'm not done surviving yet." Then she turned and walked toward the man who wanted her dead. The courtyard cleared. Soldiers from both sides formed a ring, watching, waiting, understanding that whatever happened next would determine everything. Davern circled her slowly. His smile was confident. "You're brave, I'll give you that." "Stupid. But brave. Funny. I was going to say the same about you. You really think you can beat me? I've been training with a sword since before you were born, and I've been fighting for my life since the day I was exiled." Seraphine's grip tightened on her sword. "Training is practice. This is survival. And I'm better at surviving than you are at playing soldier. We'll see." He attacked, fast, brutal, every strike designed to end the fight immediately. He was stronger, more skilled. Everything he said was true. On paper, Seraphine should have died in the first 30 seconds. But paper didn't account for rage, for desperation, for the kind of fury that came from being dismissed and discarded and told you didn't belong until it forged you into something harder than steel. She dodged, blocked, countered, used his strength against him, made him work for every inch. And with each exchange, she saw the confidence in his eyes flicker, fade, turn to doubt. Because he'd expected an easy victory, a quick execution, proof that he was right and she was wrong. Instead, he got a fight. They battled across the courtyard. Steel rang, sparks flew, blood appeared on both of them, small cuts, near misses, the kind of wounds that said the next one might be fatal. Davern's breathing got heavier, his strikes less precise, age and exhaustion catching up. Seraphine pressed the advantage, drove him back, made him defend instead of attack. And in that moment, she saw the opening, the gap, the fatal mistake every fighter makes when they stop believing they can win. She feinted high. He raised his guard. She dropped low and drove her blade through his thigh. He screamed, fell to one knee. His sword clattered across stone. Seraphine stood over him, breathing hard, blood dripping from a dozen small wounds, but alive, victorious. She raised her sword. The courtyard held its breath. Davron looked up at her, his face twisted in pain and rage and something that might have been respect. "Do it," he snarled. "Prove you're the monster they say you are." Seraphine stared down at him, at the man who'd tried to destroy her, who'd called her false and weak and corrupt, who'd torn the kingdom apart because he couldn't accept that power had shifted away from people like him. She could kill him, should kill him. The law demanded it. Justice required it. Every practical consideration said that leaving him alive was a mistake. But killing him wouldn't change anything, wouldn't fix the kingdom, wouldn't heal the wounds that had brought them to this moment. It would just add one more body to the pile. She lowered her sword. "I'm not the monster." She spoke loud enough for everyone to hear. "You are. You tore this kingdom apart, turned soldier against soldier, killed innocent people. All because you couldn't handle the idea that a woman you dismissed as weak could stand beside the throne. So here's your punishment. You live stripped of title, stripped of land, stripped of everything you valued. And every day for the rest of your miserable life, you get to remember that the false queen you tried to destroy beat you and chose mercy you didn't deserve." She turned to the soldiers on the ramparts. "Open the gates. The siege is over. Anyone who wants to keep fighting can join Davron in exile. Everyone else, get back to work rebuilding what was destroyed." For a moment, nothing happened. Then slowly, the gates opened. Soldiers filed out. Some threw down their weapons. Others knelt. All of them understood that the war was over. Davern was dragged away, still screaming curses that echoed across the courtyard until distance swallowed them. Malric crossed to Seraphine, pulled her close. His arms were the only thing keeping her standing. "You should have killed him." "I know, but I'm tired of killing, tired of being the thing they're afraid of." She looked up at him. "Maybe it's time we showed them something else, something other than fear and violence and the endless cycle of revenge. Maybe we showed them mercy, not weakness." "Mercy." Malric was silent. Then he kissed her forehead. "You're going to change this kingdom, whether it wants to be changed or not." "Good, because I didn't survive all this just to watch it stay the same." They stood together in the ruins of a battle that had almost destroyed everything. And for the first time in weeks, Seraphine felt something other than rage or fear or desperate determination. She felt hope, fragile, tentative, easily broken, but real. And maybe that was enough. The throne room looked different in the morning light, not because anything had physically changed. The pillars still rose into shadow. The obsidian wolves still guarded the aisle. The iron throne still sat on its dais like a monument to power and the cost of wielding it. But something had shifted, something fundamental. The air felt lighter. Or maybe Seraphine had just learned to breathe under the weight. She stood at the window overlooking the city. Nightspire was rebuilding, slowly, painfully, the way living things always rebuilt after fire. Scaffolding covered damaged buildings. Work crews cleared rubble from streets. Citizens moved through the markets with the careful optimism of people who'd survived disaster and weren't quite sure whether to celebrate or prepare for the next one. There would be a next one. There always was. Power had a gravitational pull that attracted threat the way wounds attracted infection. But for now, in this moment, the kingdom breathed. And that was enough. Behind her, the door opened. She didn't turn, didn't need to. She'd learned to recognize his footsteps, the rhythm of them, the weight. Malric crossed the room and stood beside her. Silent, present. They'd gotten good at silence, at the kind of companionship that didn't require words because words couldn't capture what they'd survived together. "The council wants to meet," he said finally, "to discuss restructuring. Let them wait. They've been waiting for 3 days. Then they can wait another hour." Seraphine's voice was quiet. "I'm tired of councils and restructuring and discussions about how to prevent the next rebellion. We just finished fighting the last one. Can we have one morning where we're not planning for the next disaster?" Malric was quiet. Then he spoke words that hit deeper than she expected. "This is what ruling is. Planning for disasters that haven't happened yet, trying to prevent fires before they start. It doesn't stop. It doesn't pause. The moment you stop preparing is the moment something catches you off guard, and people die. Then maybe we're doing it wrong." He turned to look at her. "What?" "All of it. The way we rule. The way we think about power." Seraphine met his eyes. "We've been playing their game, fighting their battles, trying to be the kind of rulers they expect, cold, hard, untouchable. And look where it got us. Half the kingdom dead or exiled, the other half waiting for the next attack. This isn't victory. It's just slower dying. So what do you suggest? Change the rules. Stop trying to be what they expect. Start being what they need." She turned fully to face him. "Malric, you've ruled through fear for 10 years. And it worked. It kept the kingdom stable, kept threats at bay. But it also made you alone. Made everyone around you either terrified or plotting to replace you. And I came here thinking I wanted vengeance, justice, a crown. But what I really wanted was to matter. To be seen as more than the broken thing they discarded. And now I am. Now I'm the queen who survived. And I'm still alone unless I'm with you." The words hung between them. Raw. True. The kind of honesty that only came after you'd stood in fire together and discovered what remained when everything else burned away. Malric's hand came up, cupped her face. His thumb brushed across her cheekbone. "I was alone before you. I'd gotten so good at it, I forgot what the alternative felt like. And then you walked into my throne room demanding justice wrapped in vengeance, and I thought you were insane." He smiled slightly. "I still think you're insane, but you're right. About all of it. We can't keep ruling the same way and expect different results. Something has to change, so we change it. Together. Together." He kissed her. Soft. Real. The kind of kiss that said everything words couldn't. When he pulled back, his eyes held something she'd never seen before. Peace. Or maybe just the possibility of it. "But we're going to piss off a lot of people." "Good. I'm getting used to that." What? The council meeting that afternoon was exactly as tense as Seraphine expected. The remaining council members sat around the obsidian table, looking exhausted and wary and deeply suspicious of whatever the king and queen were about to propose. Lord Garrett was there, Commander Thrace, several pack leaders who'd proven their loyalty through the rebellions, and a handful of new faces. Younger, less connected to the old power structures. People Malric had promoted not because of bloodline, but because they'd shown competence when competence mattered more than nobility. Malric stood at the head of the table, Seraphine beside him. "We're making changes," Malric said without preamble. "Effective immediately." The council members exchanged glances, the the kind that said they'd been expecting this but weren't sure what form it would take. First, the council is dissolved, permanently. Shock rippled through the room. Lord Garrett half rose from his chair. Your Majesty, you can't—
Sit down. Malric's voice was quiet, absolute. I just did. The old council was corrupt, compromised. Half of you were either traitors or too blind to see the traitors sitting beside you. So it's done. Finished. What replaces it will be different. What replaces it? Commander Thrace asked. Her voice was careful, measured. A new structure, one based on merit rather than bloodline, one where voices earn their weight through action rather than inheritance. Malric gestured to Seraphine. Explain it.
Seraphine stepped forward. She'd spent 3 days preparing this, thinking through every angle, every potential objection, every way it could fail, and she'd decided that failure was acceptable if it meant trying something different. The kingdom has been ruled by fear and control for too long. It kept us stable, but it also made us brittle. The moment pressure applied, we shattered. So we're changing the foundation. Instead of a council of nobles making decisions behind closed doors, we're creating open assemblies, pack leaders, military commanders, even common citizens. Anyone with stake in the kingdom gets voice. That's chaos, Lord Garrett said. You're describing mob rule. No. I'm describing representation. Seraphine's voice was firm. Right now, power flows from the throne down through layers of nobility that have no connection to the people they claim to govern. So when those nobles become corrupt or complacent, the people suffer and have no recourse except rebellion. We're changing that, giving them voice, not control. Voice. The king still makes final decisions, but he makes them informed by the reality people live rather than the fantasy nobles construct. And what happens when the people demand things we can't give them? Commander Thrace asked. When they want peace but we need war? When they want mercy but we need justice? Then we explain why. Malric's voice cut through the rising argument. We treat them like adults capable of understanding difficult choices rather than children who need to be protected from reality. And yes, sometimes they'll disagree. Sometimes they'll be wrong. But at least they'll be wrong knowing the full truth rather than wrong because we lied to them. The room erupted in debate. Some council members supported the change. Others argued it would undermine authority. A few stayed silent, calculating which side would win and positioning themselves accordingly. Seraphine let them argue, let them rage, because this was part of it too. The messy reality of governance, the fact that good ideas still had to survive collision with people who'd spent lifetimes learning different rules. After an hour, Malric raised his hand. Silence fell. The decision is made. You can accept it and help build something better. Or you can resist and be replaced by people who understand that holding on to the past means dying with it. He looked at each council member in turn. Choose now. One by one, they nodded. Some enthusiastically, others reluctantly. All of them understanding that the world had shifted and they either adapted or got crushed by the change. Good, Malric stood. Then let's begin. The weeks that followed were chaos dressed as progress. The first open assembly was a disaster. 300 people shouting over each other. No structure, no order. Just raw democracy crashing into centuries of autocracy and discovering they didn't speak the same language. The second was better. They'd learned to impose speaking limits, to organize by region, to let people air grievances without letting grievances turn into riots. By the third, something resembling order emerged. Not perfect, not clean, but functional in the way complex systems were functional, messy but alive. And through it all, Seraphine discovered something she hadn't expected. She was good at this. Not at commanding or controlling, at listening, at taking fragments of complaints and desires and fears and weaving them into something coherent, at translating between the language of power and the language of survival. She'd spent so long thinking she needed to be hard, unbreakable, the queen who never showed weakness. But that wasn't what the kingdom needed. They had Malric for that. They needed someone who remembered what it felt like to have nothing, to be discarded, to climb from the bottom and understand every rung on the way up. They needed her, not despite her history, because of it. One evening, after a particularly brutal assembly where a pack leader had accused her of favoritism and a farmer had called the king a tyrant and everyone had shouted until their voices gave out, Seraphine found herself back on the balcony overlooking the city. Malric joined her, handed her wine. They drank in silence. "You're good at this," he said finally. "At what? Getting yelled at? At making them believe things can be different." Malric's voice was quiet. "I rule through fear because fear is simple, predictable. You know where you stand with fear, but hope? Hope is dangerous. It makes people believe they deserve better, that things should change, that their voices matter. Is that bad? No. That's revolutionary." Malric turned to face her. "You're changing this kingdom in ways I never could. Not because you're stronger or smarter, because you give them something I never have. The belief that they're not just subjects to be ruled, but people whose lives have value beyond serving the crown. You give them that too, just differently. Do I? Because from where I'm standing, I gave them stability bought with blood. You're giving them something harder, more fragile, something that requires trust." He paused. "I don't know if they'll accept it. I don't know if it'll work, but I know it's worth trying. Even if we fail, especially if we fail. Because failure means we tried to build something better than what we inherited. And that's more than most rulers can say." They stood together as night fell over Nightspire. The city below glowed with torches and lamplight. Life continuing despite everything, because life always did. It found cracks, pushed through, survived. Seraphine thought about Ronan, about the man she'd loved who'd betrayed her so completely, about how that betrayal had led her here, to this moment, this place, this man beside her who saw her not as someone to be saved or protected, but as an equal in an impossible task. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked quietly. "Marrying me? Taking that risk?" "Every day." Malric's voice was dry. "Then you do something like stand in front of an assassin's bolt or challenge a rebel to single combat or restructure the entire governance system. And I remember why I made that choice. Because I'm insane? Because you're willing to burn the world down before letting it stay broken." He looked at her, his pale eyes reflecting lamplight. "That's what makes you dangerous. Not strength, not skill. The absolute refusal to accept that things have to be the way they've always been. Is that a compliment? It's the truth. And truth is worth more than compliments." Mug. 3 months after the rebellion ended, they held a ceremony. Not to celebrate victory, to remember cost. Every name, every soldier, every civilian, every person who died in the fighting or the rebellions or the assassinations. Read aloud in the throne room before assembled citizens, a reminder that power was always paid for in lives that weren't your own. Seraphine stood beside Malric and listened to names she didn't recognize, people who died because of choices she'd made, because she'd demanded justice, because she'd refused to accept exile, because she'd climbed onto a throne and discovered that crowns were made of other people's bones. The weight of it should have crushed her, but she'd learned something in the months since becoming queen. Weight could be carried if you acknowledged it. If you looked directly at the cost and said, "Yes, this is what it took, this is what I chose, and I'll carry it until my bones break." That was the difference between rulers who lasted and rulers who collapsed. Not strength, endurance. The willingness to carry impossible weight and keep walking. When the last name was read, when the throne room fell silent except for the sound of people breathing and crying and holding each other, Malric spoke. "We cannot bring them back. We cannot undo what was done. All we can do is make certain their deaths meant something, that we build something worth the price they paid, that we become worthy of the sacrifice they made." He turned to Seraphine. "And my queen has words." She hadn't prepared a speech, hadn't planned what to say, but standing there looking at faces marked by grief and loss and the exhausted hope of people who'd survived disaster, she found words anyway. "I came to this kingdom as an exile, someone discarded, someone told I didn't belong, and I demanded justice from a king who had every reason to turn me away." She paused. "He didn't. He offered me a bargain, a crown in exchange for vengeance, and I took it because I thought I wanted power, wanted to matter, wanted to prove everyone who dismissed me was wrong." The room was silent, listening. What I didn't understand then was that power doesn't prove anything. It just gives you the tools to build or destroy. And building is harder, takes longer, requires trusting people who might betray you, requires mercy when vengeance would be easier, requires standing in front of threats and choosing to survive them rather than let them make you into something you'd hate. She looked at Malric, then back to the assembled citizens. The people we lost today died because this kingdom was broken, because power flowed only one direction and anyone outside that flow was disposable. Because we'd built an empire on fear and control and discovered that fear and control create enemies faster than you can kill them. So we're changing that. Not because change is easy or safe or guaranteed to work, but because the alternative is more names read in more ceremonies until there's no one left to remember why we started fighting in the first place. Her voice dropped, grew quieter, more intense. I'm not your salvation. Neither is the king. We're just two people trying to build something that might outlast us. But we can't do it alone. We need you, your voices, your experiences, your willingness to believe that things can be different even when everything in your history says they can't. So that's what I'm asking. Not for faith, not for loyalty, just for the willingness to try, to build, to survive together instead of dying separately. The silence stretched. Then someone in the back started clapping. Then another. Then the room filled with the sound of people choosing hope over cynicism. Choosing to believe that maybe, just maybe, the broken queen and the cold king could build something worth believing in. It wasn't loud, wasn't overwhelming, but it was real. And real was enough. The sake. That night, Seraphine couldn't sleep. She stood in the royal chambers staring at her reflection in the window. The woman looking back was a stranger, scarred, hard, nothing like the exile who'd stumbled into Nightspire months ago begging for vengeance. This woman had killed, survived assassination attempts, restructured a kingdom, become something dangerous and necessary, and still somehow herself underneath all the armor. The door opened. Malric entered. He crossed to her without speaking and wrapped his arms around her from behind. His chin rested on her shoulder. They stood like that. Two people who'd fought too many battles holding each other in the space between wars. Do you ever wonder what would have happened if you'd said no? Seraphine asked quietly. If you'd turned me away that first night? Every day. Malric's voice was rough. I wonder if the kingdom would be more stable, if fewer people would be dead, if I'd still be the cold bastard who ruled through fear and died alone wondering if any of it mattered. And what do you conclude? That I'd trade stability for this? For you. For the chaos and the risk and the constant threat of everything falling apart. Because at least when it falls apart, I won't be alone wondering if I should have tried something different. He turned her to face him. You changed me. Made me human again. Made me care about things other than control. And I don't know if that makes me a better king, but it makes me a better man. Seraphine felt something crack open in her chest. Not breaking. Opening. The kind of vulnerability that came from trusting someone enough to show them the soft parts that survival had taught you to armor. I love you. The words came out quiet. Raw. I don't know when it happened. Somewhere between wanting to use you and wanting to survive you and wanting to build something with you. But I do. I love you. And it terrifies me because love is what broke me the first time, what made me weak enough to be discarded. Love didn't make you weak. Malric's hands cupped her face. Loving someone who didn't value you made you vulnerable. There's a difference. One is about the emotion. The other is about the person receiving it. And I swear to you, on every life lost in this kingdom, on every decision I've made and will make, I will never make you regret loving me. I will never use it against you. I will never mistake vulnerability for weakness. How can you promise that? Because I've spent 10 years being the king who trusted no one and loved nothing. And it kept me safe, but it also kept me empty. And you filled that emptiness with something I didn't know I was missing. So yes, I promise. Not because I'm noble or pure or any of the things kings are supposed to be, but because losing you would break me in ways battlefields never could. He kissed her, deep, desperate. The kind of kiss that said everything promises couldn't. When they finally broke apart, Seraphine felt tears on her cheeks. She wasn't sure when she'd started crying. We're going to fail, she said quietly. Some of these changes, some of these choices. We're going to make mistakes that cost lives. Yes. Malric didn't try to comfort her with lies. We will. Because perfection isn't possible, and anyone who promises it is either delusional or lying. But we'll fail trying to build something better rather than succeeding at maintaining something broken. And when we fail, we'll get up and try again. Together, together. Seraphine leaned into him, let him hold her, let herself be held, because that was the thing about power. It wasn't actually about being invulnerable or untouchable, or the person who never broke. It was about breaking and surviving the breaking and becoming something stronger in the fractured places. They stood like that until dawn started breaking over the valley, light creeping across stone and turning everything silver. A new day. Another chance. Another battle that wouldn't look like battle, but would determine everything anyway. And for the first time since stumbling into Nightspire more dead than alive, Seraphine felt something she'd thought was lost forever. Not happiness. Something harder. More sustainable. The knowledge that she belonged, not because someone chose her, not because a crown sat on her head, but because she'd earned her place through blood and fire and the absolute refusal to let anyone else define what she was worth. She was the exile who became queen, the broken wolf who built an empire, the woman who walked into traps and dared them to spring. And she was loved. Not despite her history, because someone saw all of it and decided she was worth fighting beside. That was power, real power, the kind that couldn't be taken, only given, only earned, only built in the space between two people who'd survived hell together and decided that whatever came next, they'd face it as one. Years later, historians would debate what changed in Nightspire during that period. Some would say the kingdom had been on the edge of collapse and the reforms barely saved it. Others would argue the reforms themselves created new problems that took generations to solve. A few would claim nothing changed at all, except the faces sitting on thrones and the illusions they told themselves about progress. But the people who lived through it knew different. They remembered the queen who'd stood before them scarred and exhausted and told them things could be better if they were willing to try. They remembered assemblies where their voices mattered. They remembered the slow shift from fear to something that felt almost like hope. Was it perfect? No. There were still betrayals, still corruption, still moments when violence was necessary and mercy felt like weakness. But there was also accountability, transparency, the sense that rulers were bound by the same reality as those they ruled rather than floating above it in isolated power. And at the center of it all stood two figures who'd survived everything the kingdom threw at them and decided survival meant building rather than destroying. King Malric, who learned that strength could include vulnerability, that trusting people was riskier than controlling them, but also infinitely more human, and Queen Seraphine, who learned that power earned through survival was more sustainable than power taken through force, that the wolf who'd been broken and discarded could become something dangerous precisely because she remembered what it felt like to have nothing. They ruled not through perfection, but through persistence, through the willingness to make hard choices and carry the weight of those choices, and keep walking even when the path ahead looked impossible. Some nights, they stood on the balcony overlooking the kingdom they'd nearly destroyed saving and wondered if any of it had been worth the cost. If the lives lost and the scars earned, and the endless battles had built something that mattered, or just postponed collapse. But then morning would come. The city would wake. People would go about their lives with the cautious optimism of those who'd survived disaster and discovered they were stronger for it. And Seraphine would look at Malric and see the same exhaustion and determination she felt reflected in his eyes. They'd keep going, keep building, keep trying, because that was what survival meant. Not reaching some mythical finish line where everything became perfect. Just enduring, adapting, refusing to let the weight crush you even when it should. And maybe that was the only happy ending that mattered. Not perfection, not paradise. Just the knowledge that you'd faced the worst the world could throw at you, and you were still standing, still fighting, still human underneath all the armor, still loved, still whole, still here. The wolves howled across Nightspire that night, not in mourning, not in rage, but in acknowledgement. That power still carried weight, that crowns still demanded sacrifice, that ruling meant making impossible choices with consequences that rippled through generations, but also that survival was possible, that broken things could be rebuilt, that exile could become queen and Cold King could become human, and together they could forge something that might last beyond the span of their individual lives. Not because they were perfect, but because they were willing to try, to fail, to get up and try again, to build something better than what they'd inherited, even knowing they'd never see it completed. That was the real rebellion. Not against specific enemies or corrupt systems, against the idea that things had to stay broken just because they'd always been broken. Against the belief that power meant domination rather than service. Against the fear that vulnerability was weakness rather than the foundation of real strength. And as dawn broke over the valley and another day began with all its impossible demands and necessary compromises and battles that would look like meetings but determine everything, Seraphine stood beside Malric and felt something settle inside her. Peace wasn't the absence of conflict, it was the presence of purpose. The knowledge that what you were fighting for mattered more than what you were fighting against. She'd come here for vengeance, found something infinitely more dangerous. A reason to keep living, keep building, keep becoming whatever the kingdom needed her to be. Not the false queen they'd feared, not the broken exile they'd dismissed. Something new. Something forged in fire and tempered by survival and strong enough to carry the weight of empire without losing the parts that made her human. And that, in the end, was the only victory that mattered. Not defeating enemies, not seizing power, but becoming the person worthy of the crown she wore, worthy of the man who stood beside her, worthy of the kingdom that had tried to destroy her and discovered she was harder to break than anyone expected. The story didn't end there. Stories like this never really end, they just pause, breathe, wait for the next challenge, the next threat, the next moment when everything hangs in the balance and choices matter more than strength. But for now, in this moment, standing on the balcony of Nightspire as the sun climbed higher and the kingdom woke and life continued its relentless forward motion, Seraphine allowed herself something she'd thought was lost forever. Hope, fragile, dangerous, powerful beyond measure. Hope that the broken could heal, that the exiled could belong, that love earned through fire was stronger than love built on fantasy. Hope that crowns could be worn without becoming monsters, that power could be wielded without losing humanity, that two people who'd survived hell together could build heaven in the ruins. And as Malric's hand found hers and their fingers intertwined and they faced another day in a kingdom that demanded everything and gave nothing easily, Seraphine smiled, not because everything was perfect, but because perfect was impossible and unnecessary and ultimately boring. This was better, messy, real, hard-won, worth every scar, every battle, every moment of doubt and fear and desperate determination to survive one more day. This was life. Not the fantasy version, the real version, where happy endings were earned through blood and compromise and the willingness to keep fighting long after anyone reasonable would have quit. And she wouldn't trade it for anything. Not for the life she'd lost, not for the fantasies she'd believed, not for the comfortable numbness of giving up and letting the world stay broken. She'd walked into fire and become flame, fallen and learned to fly with broken wings, died and discovered that resurrection was possible if you were stubborn enough to crawl back from the grave and demand a second chance. She was Seraphine Vale, exile, queen, survivor. The wolf who learned that strength wasn't about never breaking. It was about breaking and healing and breaking again and discovering that each fracture made you more flexible, more human, more real. And she was done apologizing for taking up space in a world that had tried to erase her. Let them remember her. Let history debate whether she was hero or villain or something more complicated than either label could contain. She'd know the truth. That she was simply someone who refused to let betrayal be the end of her story. Who chose to write new chapters in blood and ink and desperate hope. Who discovered that the greatest rebellion wasn't against specific enemies, but against the belief that survival meant becoming what hurt you. The sun rose higher over Nightspire, the kingdom breathed, and Seraphine turned away from the window to face whatever came next. Not alone. Never alone again. But with the man who'd offered her a bargain and discovered he'd made a partner instead. With the people who'd chosen to believe things could change. With the hope that tomorrow might be better than today, even knowing tomorrow would bring new battles. That was enough. More than enough. Everything that mattered. The story ended. But the life continued, messy, beautiful, impossible, real. And in the end, real was all anyone could hope for.